Everyone thinks being the wrong choice is the worst thing that can happen to a person. I disagree. I think the worst thing, the thing that actually breaks people quietly, from the inside, over years, is being the right choice that nobody ever picked. I know because I lived it. For 24 years, I watched my pack pour their love, their loyalty, their absolute devotion into a woman who wore the Luna title like a costume she'd borrowed and never intended to return. I watched them excuse her coldness as strength, mistake her silence for wisdom, interpret her absence during their hardest moments as some kind of dignified restraint. I watched. I said nothing, because who was I? My name is Sophia Dane. I'm not ranked. I'm not legacy. I'm the daughter of the pack's former head physician, a quiet man who died when I was 16, with more kindness in his hands than most wolves carry in their entire bloodline, and a mother who remarried out of territory before I was old enough to resent her for it. I grew up on the edges of Greymore Pack, not an outcast, not invisible, just adjacent, close enough to matter in small ways, never close enough to matter in the ways that counted. And the woman at the center of everything, the one they trusted, the one they celebrated, the one whose portrait hangs in the Great Hall with a golden plaque underneath reading Luna Evelyn Voss, protector of Greymore. She was my aunt. Not by blood, by marriage, but she raised me after my father died, and I watched her from closer than anyone else in that pack ever did. I saw the back of the performance, not just the front. I saw what she was behind the title, and I said nothing. For years, I said nothing. Until the night the pack was burning, and she was gone, and the only person left standing between 300 wolves and the thing hunting them through the dark was me. They didn't choose me that night because they finally saw me clearly. They didn't choose me because they suddenly understood what I'd watched and known and carried in silence for a decade. They chose me because there was no one else. But here's the thing about bleeding for people who never looked at you long enough to learn your name. Sometimes that's enough to make them finally look. And sometimes what they find, when they do, changes everything. I didn't set out to be anyone's Luna. I didn't set out to be anyone's anything. But the night was coming, the pack was running out of time, and someone had to be the thing that stood still. Everyone had assumed that would be Evelyn. They were wrong. They had been wrong for a very long time. Chapter 1. The portrait had been there my entire life, but I only really looked at it once. I was 9 years old. My father was still alive, still warm, still the kind of man who smelled like pine salve and patience. He'd brought me to the Great Hall for the midwinter gathering, one of those annual pack events that exists primarily to remind everyone of the hierarchy they already know, and I'd wandered away from his side the way 9-year-olds do, following the candlelight down the eastern corridor until I found myself alone in front of it. Luna Evelyn, life-sized, oil on canvas, in a heavy gilded frame that probably cost more than most pack families made in a year. She was painted standing at the edge of the forest at dusk. Greymore's forest. I recognized the tree line. One hand raised slightly, palm open, like she was either beckoning something forward or holding something back. The artist had given her a kind of luminous certainty. She looked like someone who always knew which way the wind was turning before it turned. I stared at it for a long time. Then my father found me, crouched beside me until we were eye level, and said, very quietly, "What are you thinking?" I told him the truth, the way only 9-year-olds can, without any awareness of what the truth costs. She doesn't look like she does at home. My father was quiet for a moment. Then he put his hand on my shoulder, stood up, and said, "Come on, little one. The food's getting cold." He never answered me, but he also never told me I was wrong. 15 years later, I was standing in front of that same portrait with a mop. Not metaphorically, an actual mop. The Great Hall's east corridor flooded every autumn when the drainage culvert behind the old stone wall got choked with leaves. And for the last 4 years, ever since the pack's maintenance roster got restructured and somehow my name ended up on the permanent volunteer list in a way I still don't fully understand, that had been my problem to solve. "You know," said a voice behind me, "most people who have a grievance with a portrait just avoid looking at it." I turned around. Logan Voss was leaning against the opposite wall with his arms crossed, and that expression he always had, not quite a smirk, not quite a frown, something suspended in between, that I'd spent years failing to accurately read. He was Ethan Voss's younger brother, which meant he was also Evelyn's brother-in-law, which meant he occupied that particular category of person who was powerful enough to make your life difficult, but charming enough that most people forgot to notice. I had not forgotten to notice. "I'm not having a grievance," I said. "I'm mopping." "You've been staring at it for 4 minutes." I was resting my eyes. "On a portrait. It's restful." He pushed off the wall and walked toward me with the easy, unhurried gait of someone who had never once in his life needed to move quickly because the world rearranged itself around him. Logan Voss was not his brother. Ethan was gravity itself, still and dense and inescapable. Logan was weather. You didn't always see it coming, but you felt it shift the air before it arrived. He stopped beside me and looked up at the portrait. "She was in a mood when they painted that," he said. "Did you know? The original commission had her smiling. She sent the artist back 3 times until he got rid of it." I looked at him sideways. "Why?" Said smiling made her look uncertain. He tilted his head slightly. She had a theory that a Luna who looked like she was enjoying herself looked like a Luna who could be caught off guard. I turned back to the portrait. The open hand, the luminous certainty, the complete and total absence of warmth. "She wasn't wrong," I said, before I could stop myself. "That's a very effective theory." A beat of silence. "Sophia, I shouldn't have said that." "Probably not," but his voice wasn't sharp. It was almost careful, like he was picking something up that he didn't want to drop. "You knew her better than most, growing up in that house." "I knew her well enough," I said, which was the diplomatic version of "I knew her completely, and what I knew would reorganize everything you think you understand about the last 15 years. And I will take that knowledge to my grave, because saying it out loud would burn this pack to the ground faster than anything hunting us from the outside." Logan looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, and moved on down the corridor. I went back to mopping, but my hands weren't quite steady. Here is the thing about Greymore Pack that outsiders never understood. It was not a cruel place. That's important. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy, and wrong, to paint it as somewhere dark and rotten, somewhere that deserved what was coming. Greymore was not cruel. It was full of people who worked hard and loved their families, and showed up for each other in the ways they knew how. The Midwinter Gathering wasn't just hierarchy theater. It was also the night the Pack's elder women organized the winter supply share, making sure every family with young children had enough to carry them through the cold months. The Voss family funded it quietly, without announcement. That was real. That was good. Greymore's problem wasn't cruelty. Its problem was a very specific, very human kind of blindness. The kind that comes from wanting to believe in something so badly that you build the belief first and examine the evidence later. Never. They had wanted a Luna like Evelyn, composed, commanding, unreadable in the way that reads as depth. They had wanted her to be the steady thing at the center of the pack, the north point of their compass, the proof that Greymore's leadership was as sure and permanent as the mountain at their backs. And so they had decided she was all of those things. And then spent 15 years protecting that decision from anything that threatened to complicate it. I had threatened to complicate it exactly once. I was 18, 6 months after my father died, still raw enough that my judgment was probably compromised in both directions, towards silence and away from it. I had gone to Alpha Ethan, not Evelyn, Ethan, because even then I understood the difference between reporting to the performance and reporting to the authority, and I had told him, carefully, about something I had seen. Evelyn, at the edge of the southern border, alone, which was unusual, speaking to a man I didn't recognize, from a direction that wasn't Greymore territory. I hadn't heard the conversation. I didn't have accusations. I had a fact and an instinct, and I laid them both at the Alpha's feet as honestly as I could. Ethan had listened. His face had given me nothing. It never did. And then he'd said, very evenly, "Thank you, Sophia. I'll look into it." And then nothing happened. No follow-up, no questions, no acknowledgement that I'd ever said anything at all. Evelyn had looked at me differently after that. Not with anger. That would have been too obvious, too easily read, just with a subtle, permanent recalibration, like a camera that had refocused, like I had moved, in her internal map of the world, from adjacent and harmless to adjacent and noted. 6 years passed. I mopped floors. I painted the occasional wall. I helped at medical events because my father's training had stuck in my hands the way his kindness had stuck in my chest, and there were always people who needed the kind of help that didn't require a rank to give. I stayed on the edges. I stayed quiet. I had almost convinced myself that quiet was enough. Then, 3 days ago, Evelyn left. She didn't announce it. That was the first strange thing. Evelyn, who controlled every detail of her own presentation, who had never made an unplanned move in 15 years of lunatic, was simply gone one morning. No formal departure. No explanation to the council. Her rooms empty, her personal items cleared, nothing left behind except the faint scent of her perfume and a single sheet of pack stationery on the Alpha's desk. I don't know what the note said. I'm not ranked enough to be in rooms where those conversations happen. What I know is what I watched from the edges, the way I always watch. Alpha Ethan in the great hall that evening, standing at the head of the long table with his council around him and his face arranged into the particular stillness he uses when something has hit him hard enough that he can't trust his expression to stay controlled without effort. Logan beside him, for once not performing ease, jaw set and eyes moving around the room like he was cataloging threat vectors. The council, 7 wolves, most of them older, all of them visibly rattled, talking over each other in low, urgent voices about pack stability, about the timing, about the border reports that had been coming in for the last 2 weeks. The border reports. That was the second strange thing. For 2 weeks, the perimeter scouts had been logging anomalies, not attacks, nothing that clean, presences at the edge, scent trails that didn't belong to any known pack or rogue, something circling Greymoor's territory in a pattern that the scouts couldn't identify because it didn't match any pattern they'd been trained to recognize. And now the Luna was gone, and the pack was scared. Not the kind of scared they showed each other. Greymoor wolves were too proud for that, too trained in the performance of steadiness that Evelyn's 15 years had modeled for them. But I could feel it in the way they moved through the compound, too brisk, too deliberate, the particular body language of people who are working very hard not to look like they're looking over their shoulder. I felt it too. But underneath the fear, underneath the part of me that had watched the border reports, and watched Evelyn's empty rooms, and was quietly, grimly connecting threads, there was something else. Something I am not proud of. Something that felt, God help me, like relief. Because the thing I had known for 15 years, the thing I had carried like a stone in my chest and never once set down in any place where anyone could see it, was that Evelyn was going to get them hurt. Not because she was monstrous, not because she'd set out to destroy anything, but because she had never, not once in 15 years, put Greymoor above herself. And whatever was circling those borders, it knew that. I was standing at the edge of the great hall that night, watching the council argue and the Alpha go still, and the pack try to hold its shape around a hole that had just appeared at its center, when Logan found me again. He didn't say anything clever this time. He just stood beside me, looked at the room, and said quietly, "She's not coming back, is she?" It wasn't a question. I could have said any number of careful things. Instead, I said, "No." He turned to look at me, and for the first time in the entire time I'd known Logan Voss, his expression was completely unguarded, not weather, just a man, standing in the wreckage of something he'd half expected and fully dreaded, looking at someone who'd seen it coming. "How long have you known?" he asked. I looked at the portrait at the end of the hall, Evelyn's open hand, her luminous, certain, perfectly constructed face. "Long enough," I said. Outside, at the edge of the forest, something that didn't belong to Greymoor pressed against the border like a tide, testing a wall. And the wall, for the first time in 15 years, had nothing standing behind it. Chapter 2. I want you to understand something before you judge me. I was never meant to be a Luna. Not in the way the stories tell it. Not the destined, bone-deep, made-for-this way that Greymoor pack like to believe about me. I was meant to be a senator's wife in a mid-sized city, 3 states away from any wolf territory, hosting dinner parties and chairing charity committees, and living a life so thoroughly ordinary that nothing supernatural would ever find me. That was the plan. My mother's plan, specifically. She was human, completely, peacefully, blissfully human, and she had raised me to be the same, even knowing what ran in half my blood. Deny it long enough, she used to say, and it stops asking. She wasn't cruel about it. She was terrified. There's a difference, though I didn't always remember to make it. The plan dissolved the night William Voss walked into a gallery opening in the city and looked at me across a room full of people, and I felt the bond snap into place, like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known was in my chest. I didn't want it. I want that on the record, even if the record is just me, sitting in a motel room 400 miles from Graymore with a single bag, and 15 years of performance finally peeled off my bones. I did not want the bond. I did not want the pack. I did not want the title or the portrait, or the weight of 300 wolves pressing against my awareness every waking hour, like a frequency I could never turn off. I wanted William. That was all. Just the man. Not the alpha. Not the legacy. Not the territory. But you don't get to separate those things. I learned that within the first year. You take the mate, you take the mantle, and the mantle, in Graymore's case, was old and heavy, and came with expectations so deeply embedded in the pack's culture that questioning them felt less like dissent and more like trying to argue with gravity. So I stopped questioning. I built the performance instead, composed, commanding, certain. I gave them what they needed to believe, and they believed it, and for a long time that felt like enough. William died 7 years into our marriage, a border conflict with a rival pack, fast, ugly, the kind of death that doesn't give you time to say anything that matters, and I became, overnight, a widowed Luna in a pack that needed steadiness above everything else, leading beside an alpha, Ethan, William's younger brother, 26 years old and already carrying more gravity than any man I'd ever met, who had every reason to resent my presence and instead simply absorbed it into his responsibilities, the way he absorbed everything. I should have left then. I know that now. I knew it then, if I'm honest. The bond that had tied me to William was gone, and without it I was just a woman in a title, held in place by habit and obligation and the fear of what it would mean to the pack if their Luna walked away while they were already grieving their alpha. So I stayed, and the years went by. And I stayed. And the thing I had never told anyone, not William, not Ethan, not the council, not a single soul in Graymore territory, grew heavier with every year I stayed. The man at the southern border had a name, Thomas Reed, former pack archivist, Graymore born, exiled 12 years ago for reasons the official record listed as conduct unbecoming, which is pack bureaucracy language for we caught him doing something we don't want documented in detail. I had known Thomas before the exile. Not well. Peripherally. The way you know most people on the edges of pack life when you're a new Luna still learning everyone's name. He had been quiet, methodical, the kind of man who knew where every document was filed, and why every decision had been made, and what the gap was between the official version and the actual version of events going back 40 years. He found me 8 months ago. Not at the border, that came later. He found me through a letter, forwarded through 3 intermediaries, that arrived in a plain envelope with no return address and a single line inside. I know what Graymore is built on. I think you do too. We should talk. I should have taken it to Ethan. I know. I should have taken it to Ethan, laid it on his desk, and let the pack's alpha handle whatever Thomas Reed thought he knew. I didn't. Because the thing Thomas Reed thought he knew, I did know it too. Had known it for 11 years. Locked in the part of myself I'd walled off so thoroughly that some days I almost believed the wall was a real thing, structural, permanent. It wasn't. The letter proved that. So I met him. At the southern border, in the gray pre-dawn when the scouts changed shifts and there was a 12-minute window of genuine privacy. Once, then twice, then 4 more times over 6 months. And Thomas told me things I already knew and things I didn't. And the things I didn't know were worse than the things I did, and by the 5th meeting, I understood that what was circling Graymore's borders wasn't random. It was specific. It was looking for something the pack had taken, decades before I ever arrived, something buried so deep in Graymore's founding history that the current council didn't know it existed, something that the pack had built its legacy on, quietly, in the way that institutions build their legacies on things they'd rather not examine too closely. And the thing circling the borders wasn't going to stop circling. It was building toward something. Thomas called it a reckoning. Dramatic word. He was a dramatic man, in the quiet, archival way. The kind of dramatic that lives in footnotes and implications rather than declarations. I called it a disaster. And 2 weeks ago, when the border reports started coming in, and I understood that the building was nearly done, that whatever was out there was nearly ready to stop circling and start arriving, I made a decision. Not a good one. I am not standing here, in this motel room in this city, 400 miles away, telling you it was good. I am telling you it was the decision I made, which is different. I left. Because I am not a Luna. I was never a Luna. I am a woman who wanted one man and got his entire world instead, and spent 15 years performing competence in a role I was never built for, and when the moment came that required not performance but actual sacrifice, I found out what I was made of, and it wasn't enough. But here is the thing I need you to understand, the thing that will matter later, when the night comes and the pack finds out what's coming for them. I left a message. Not for Ethan. He would have stopped me, or tried to, and the conversation would have taken time the pack didn't have. Not for the council. They would have convened a meeting and debated procedure while the borders dissolved. I left it for the one person in Greymore who I knew had been watching long enough to understand what I was about to tell them. The one person who had come to Ethan 6 years ago with a fact and an instinct that were both exactly right and been quietly, carefully set aside. The one person who had never once, in all the years I'd known her, put herself above the pack, not because she'd been told to, not because the title demanded it, not because anyone was watching, but because that was simply, genuinely, constitutionally who she was. I left it for Sophia Dane. A sealed envelope slipped under her door in the early hours before I left. Inside, everything Thomas had told me, every document reference, every date, the nature of what was circling the borders and why, and what it wanted and, most importantly, what would stop it. What would actually stop it. Not force, not a counterattack, not the kind of strength Greymore had been training for. Something older. Something the pack's founders had understood and deliberately buried because it was inconvenient for the story they wanted to tell about themselves. A Luna's blood, offered freely, at the northern boundary stone, before the new moon. Not taken, not forced, freely given. The founding records called it the first debt. Greymore's original Luna had made it, generations back, sealing the territory against the thing that had been hunting these lands since before the pack existed. The seal had held for nearly a century. But seals need renewal. And the last renewal had been missed, deliberately, quietly, conveniently missed, 30 years ago by a Luna who decided the old ways were superstition, and the pack's growing strength was proof they'd outgrown them. The thing at the border wasn't a new threat. It was an old debt, coming to collect. I knew Sophia would understand the documents. I knew she would find the founding records Thomas had referenced. I knew she would go to Ethan. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know, sitting in that motel room, making myself not think about the faces of 300 people I had failed, was whether Ethan would listen this time. Whether the pack would follow someone they'd never thought to look at. Whether Sophia would be willing to be the thing that stood still when everything came apart. I thought she would. I had watched her for 15 years from the center of the stage she'd never been offered, and I had known, with the only real certainty I'd ever had in Greymore, that she was what I had only ever managed to pretend to be. I just hoped I hadn't waited too long to say so. Outside the motel window, the moon was 3 days from new. The clock was already running. Chapter 3. I found the envelope at 4:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I hadn't been sleeping. Hadn't really slept properly in 3 days. Not since the border reports started coming in with that particular quality of wrongness that I couldn't articulate to anyone, because I didn't have the rank or the vocabulary, or the standing to walk into a council meeting and say, something about the pattern of these sightings feels ancient and deliberate, and I think we are running out of time. So instead, I'd been lying on my back in the dark, staring at the ceiling, doing what I always do when I can't sleep and can't speak, running the thing I know through my head over and over, looking for the angle that makes it speakable, the door I can actually open. The envelope was on the floor just inside my door, plain, no name on the front, sealed with plain wax, no crest, which told me something immediately, because Evelyn did nothing without her crest, had spent 15 years building a visual language of authority around that small oval stamp. Except this time, I sat on the edge of my bed and held it for a full minute before I opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten, Evelyn's handwriting, which I recognized from years of seeing it on pack notices and formal documents, but different now. Faster, less controlled. The handwriting of someone writing in the dark at speed, without the usual performance of composure. And underneath the letter, folded carefully, a thick sheaf of photocopied documents. I read the letter first. Then I read it again. Then I sat very still for approximately 4 minutes, which is how long it took for the full weight of what I was holding to settle into my bones. Then I said, out loud, to my empty room, "Evelyn, you absolute coward." Not because she was wrong. Everything in that letter had the ring of something I'd half known for years finally arriving in full. The first debt, the missed renewal, the nature of what was circling the borders. It landed less like a revelation, and more like a diagnosis you'd suspected for a long time finally being put in writing. She was a coward because she was right, and she left anyway. Because she had known this was coming, and she'd had months, to bring it to Ethan, to the council, to anyone with the standing to act, and instead she'd carried it alone, until the moment it became unavoidable, and then she'd put it in an envelope and handed it to the least-ranked person in the pack, and walked out the door. She'd handed it to me, which meant she'd done one true thing, at the end. She'd finally looked at me clearly. It didn't make me feel good. I want to be honest about that. It should have felt like vindication, 15 years of being adjacent, finally acknowledged. Instead, it felt like someone throwing you a rope from a boat they were abandoning. But I caught it anyway. Because that's the thing about being the person who always watches, who always knows, who always carries the weight quietly without being asked. When the moment finally comes, you don't get to be bitter about how it arrived. You just have to move. I was dressed and out the door by 5:15. The compound was quiet at that hour. That particular pre-dawn stillness that feels less like peace and more like the world holding its breath. I moved through it quickly, the documents tucked inside my jacket, running through the problem the way my father had taught me to run through a medical emergency. What do I know? What do I need? Who can help? What I knew, the first debt was real, documented, and overdue by 30 years. What was circling the border was not a rogue pack or an external threat in any conventional sense. It was something older, something the pack's founding Luna had negotiated with rather than fought, and the negotiation was about to expire with catastrophic results. The renewal required a Luna's blood at the northern boundary stone before the new moon, 3 days from now. What I needed, someone with the authority to act on this information before the council spent those 3 days in procedural debate. Who could help? One person. But first, one other person. Elder Dorothy Hale was 81 years old, and the only person in Greymore who had been alive for the last renewal, the one 30 years ago that had been missed. She'd been a young woman then, newly mated, not yet on the Elder Council. She lived alone now in the oldest cottage on pack grounds, the one built from the original settlement timber, with a garden that produced herbs no one else could identify, and a memory that pack leadership had been quietly relying on for decades, while simultaneously dismissing her in formal settings, because she was old and small, and had a habit of saying true things at inconvenient moments. She opened the door before I knocked. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. That should have surprised me. It didn't. Dorothy Hale had that effect. She was small, had been shrinking incrementally for years, the way very old wolves sometimes do when they've stopped needing to take up space, with white hair pulled back simply and eyes the particular sharp, clear gray of someone whose body was winding down, but whose mind had not received that memo. She was already dressed, already had tea on, already had 2 cups out. I sat down at her kitchen table and put Evelyn's documents between us. She looked at them without touching them, then she looked at me. "She left," Dorothy said, not a question. "Last night." She wrapped both hands around her teacup, "and she left that for you." "Yes." "Not for Ethan." "No." Dorothy nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she'd been calculating for a while. "Smart woman," she said, and then, before I could react to that, "Terrible Luna." but smart woman. She knew Ethan would try to solve it like a war. It's not a war, I said. No. Dorothy finally reached out and touched the edge of the documents, not opening them, just acknowledging them. It's a debt. Those are different things. Wars you can win with strength. Debts you can only settle with what's actually owed. I watched her. You knew about the first debt. I've always known about the first debt. She said it simply, without drama, the way you'd acknowledge knowing that winter follows autumn. My grandmother told me. Her grandmother told her. It's the kind of knowledge that gets passed woman to woman in this pack, very quietly, because the men who built Greymoor's formal history decided it was inconvenient, and the women who watched them make that decision understood that inconvenient truths need to be kept somewhere safe. I felt something shift in my chest, that particular feeling of a piece falling into place that you didn't know was missing. Why didn't you bring it forward? I asked. When the 30-year renewal was missed. I did. Her voice was level. Completely, almost peacefully level. I brought it to the Alpha at the time, Ethan's father. I sat in that same great hall, at that same long table, and I told him exactly what I'm telling you, that the debt was real, that the renewal had been missed, that we had time to correct it but not much. And he thanked me very kindly and told me that Greymoor had grown beyond the need for what he called old superstitions, that the pack's strength was its own protection. She took a sip of tea. He was a good man. He meant well. He was also completely, catastrophically wrong, and I have spent 30 years watching what he set in motion move very slowly toward this pack like a tide. The kitchen was very quiet. Dorothy, I said carefully. The letter says the renewal requires Aluna's blood. Freely given. Yes. Evelyn is gone. Yes. And the new moon is in 3 days. Yes. She set down her teacup and looked at me with those clear gray eyes, direct and unblinking, and completely, almost gently certain. Sophia, why do you think Evelyn left the letter for you, and not for anyone else? I had known the answer since I'd read the letter. I'd been not saying it for the last 40 minutes, the way you don't say a thing that changes everything until you absolutely have to. Because the renewal doesn't require the Luna, I said slowly. It requires a Luna. Someone the pack recognizes, even instinctively, even without a formal title. Someone the territory itself, the bond between land and pack, acknowledges. Dorothy nodded. And she thought the territory would acknowledge me. The territory has acknowledged you for years, child. Dorothy's voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. You've been moving through this land your entire life, with your father's care in your hands, and your own watching in your eyes. And the land knows the difference between someone who holds a title and someone who tends. Evelyn held the title. You tended. I stared at her. I'm not ranked. I have no official. The first debt doesn't care about official ranking. Dorothy stood up, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone who has learned to trust their body's pace. She moved to the small bookshelf beside the hearth and pulled out something I hadn't noticed before. A slim, very old volume. Its cover worn to a gray-brown softness that suggested decades of handling. She set it on the table in front of me. Greymoor, Original Settlement Record, Year 1. Page 47, she said. Read the definition of Luna that the founders actually used. Not the one that ended up in the formal history, the original one. I opened to page 47. The handwriting was old, the ink faded to brown, but legible, and the definition was not what I expected. Luna, she who tends the bond between pack and land, not appointed, not ranked, recognized by what she gives without being asked. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Dorothy. Ethan needs to know about this, I said. Yes. She sat back down. He does. The question is whether he'll listen this time. Her eyes were steady on mine. 6 years ago, he didn't. 6 years ago, I came to him with a suspicion. And now? I looked at the documents spread across her table. Evelyn's letter, the founding record, 30 years of a truth that had been kept alive by old women passing it woman to woman in the quiet, because the formal history had decided it was inconvenient. Now I have proof, I said. Dorothy nodded, once, and picked up her teacup again. Then go, she said. You have 3 days, and the alpha is already awake. He hasn't slept either. And Sophia, she said my name in a way that made me pause at the door. When you walk in there, don't apologize for knowing. Don't soften it. Don't make it easier for him to set aside. I looked back at her. Your father used to do that, she said gently. Make the truth smaller so it wouldn't frighten people. It's a kindness. It's also how the truth gets lost. She looked at me over her teacup. Don't make it smaller, whatever it costs. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I nodded, tucked the documents back inside my jacket, picked up the old settlement record, and walked out into the gray pre-dawn. The northern tree line was visible from Dorothy's garden path, dark, still, and at its very edge, so faint I might have imagined it. A shimmer, like heat haze but cold, like something pressing against a wall that was almost ready to give. 3 days. I started walking faster. Chapter 4. The door to Ethan's study was open. That was the first unusual thing. In 6 years of living on the periphery of Greymoor's inner workings, I had never once seen that door open before 8 in the morning. It was a detail so small that most people wouldn't register it, but I had spent years cataloging the small details of this pack's rhythms, the way my father had cataloged symptoms, not because I was looking for something wrong, but because you couldn't identify wrong without first knowing what right looked like. The open door at 5:40 in the morning was wrong. Or rather, it was the right kind of wrong. The kind that meant whoever was inside had stopped managing appearances and was just trying to hold something together with both hands. I stopped in the corridor outside and took one breath. Dorothy's voice in my head, don't make it smaller, whatever it costs. Then I knocked on the open door. Ethan looked up from the table. He was not behind his desk. He was at the long work table on the eastern side of the room, the one that was usually clear, used for formal meetings and document signings, and it was covered. Maps, I registered first. Greymoor's territory maps, the detailed ones with topographic markings and border notation, spread edge to edge with weights holding the corners. Beside them, printed scout reports, a dozen at least, some with handwritten annotations in the margins. 2 empty coffee cups, a third, still steaming, that he hadn't touched. He looked like a man who had been awake for 30 hours making very precise plans for a problem he didn't fully understand yet. Sophia. His voice was even. It was always even. I had never in my life heard Ethan Voss's voice lose its fundamental steadiness. But there were registers within that evenness. Tonal variations that most people didn't bother to learn, because they assumed flatness meant absence. I had learned them. Right now his voice was in the register I privately called controlled urgency, the one that meant he was moving fast internally while holding everything external still. It's early. I know. I stepped into the room. I need to show you something. His eyes moved to the documents in my hands, then back to my face. Something shifted in his expression, a fractional recalibration, the way it had 6 years ago when I'd come to him at the southern border. Except this time it wasn't dismissal waiting on the other side of the calculation. This time it was something more like attention, real attention, the kind that cost something. Close the door, he said. I put everything on the table. Evelyn's letter first, then the photocopied documents Thomas Reed had compiled, border records, archival references, the suppressed founding history, then Dorothy's settlement record, open to page 47. I didn't explain as I laid them out. I'd made a decision on the walk over. Let the material speak first. Don't frame it, don't soften it, don't give him a version of it pre-digested for easy consumption. Give him the raw thing, and let him be the alpha he actually was, not the managed version that pack presentations usually got. He read in silence. Complete silence. Not the silence of someone humoring a presentation they'd already decided about. I knew that silence, had been on the receiving end of it once before in this room. This was working silence, the kind where you could almost hear the gears of a serious mind engaging with serious material. He read the letter twice, went through the documents methodically, pausing on 3 of them to read more carefully, the border correlation chart, the archival reference to the first debt renewal schedule, and the suppressed account of the original Luna's negotiation. Then he read page 47 of the settlement record, and I watched something move across his face that I didn't have a name for yet. When he finally looked up, 5 minutes had passed. Where did you get this? he asked. Evelyn left it for me, under my door, before she left. A beat. She left it for you. Yes. The thing moved across his face again. I placed it this time. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. The particular expression of a man who has just received confirmation of something he'd suspected and hoped was wrong. How long have you known about the first debt? Since 4:47 this morning, when I read the letter, but I went to Dorothy Hale before I came to you. She's known about it for 30 years. Dorothy, he stopped. She never said anything. She said something 30 years ago, to your father. I kept my voice level. He thanked her, and told her the pack had outgrown old superstitions. The silence this time had a different quality. Heavier. Sophia. He said my name with the care of someone choosing their footing on uncertain ground. 6 years ago, when you came to me about what you'd seen at the southern border. You don't have to. I didn't follow up. He said it directly, without deflection, which surprised me enough that I stopped speaking. I looked into it, briefly, and not thoroughly enough, and I let Evelyn's explanation satisfy me when it shouldn't have. Because it was easier than the alternative. He held my gaze. That was a failure of my judgment. I want to say that clearly before we go any further. I hadn't expected that. I'd prepared for a version of this conversation where I had to argue my way past his skepticism, where I had to prove that what I was bringing him was worth his time. I had not prepared for an apology. I stood with it for a moment, not quite sure what to do with it. All right, I said finally, because what else do you say? I know felt like accusation. It's fine. Would have been a lie. All right was the truth. It was what it was, and we were here now. And there were 3 days. He nodded. Then he looked back at the documents. The new moon is in 3 days. Yes. And the renewal requires... He paused on that section of Evelyn's letter. A luna's blood, freely given, at the northern boundary stone. Yes. Evelyn is gone. Yes. I watched him, but the first debt's definition of Luna isn't titular. It's recognized by what she gives without being asked. He'd already found page 47. Of course he had. I read it. Then you understand what Evelyn was saying when she left it for me. He looked up from the page. And this was the moment I'd been moving toward since 4:47 in the morning, since Dorothy's kitchen, since the walk across the pre-dawn compound with the northern tree line shimmering at the edge of my vision. Ethan Voss, Alpha of Greymore, looked at me the way I had spent 6 years wanting someone in this pack to look at me and simultaneously dreading, because being seen after years of being adjacent is not comfortable. It's not a relief. It's terrifying, actually, in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. It means you can no longer be overlooked. It means what you do next is witnessed. This is your blood we're talking about, he said. Quiet, direct, offered freely, at the boundary stone, 3 days from now. To settle a debt the pack incurred before you were born. For people who have never formally recognized anything you've contributed to this pack, on behalf of a title no one has given you. I know what it is, I said. I need to know if you understand what I'm asking you. You haven't asked me anything yet. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile. I wasn't sure Ethan's face did that easily, but an approximation, a slight easing around the eyes that meant the same thing. I'm asking you now. I looked at the maps on his table, Greymoor's territory, spreading out in careful topographic detail. Every trail I'd walked since I was 9 years old, every boundary stone I'd passed without fanfare, without rank, without anyone noting that I knew them as well as anyone in this pack. The lake behind the main house, the old settlement timber of Dorothy's cottage, my father's grave, in the eastern memorial grove, marked with a stone that the pack had placed with genuine grief, because whatever else Greymoor was, it had loved Daniel Dane and known what it lost when it lost him. My father's pack, my pack. However adjacent I'd always stood to it. What exactly would it cost? I asked, not because I needed the answer to make my decision. I think I'd already made it somewhere between Dorothy's kitchen and the corridor outside this door, but because I wasn't going to walk into this without full information, and Ethan needed to know that about me. The blood offering. What does the original record say? He checked the documents, found the reference. It was in one of Thomas Reed's archival compilations, a translation from the original settlement language that was dense and slightly archaic. He read it carefully, then read it again, then looked up. It's not a large quantity, he said. A few drops on the boundary stone, spoken words of offering. The original account describes it as, he scanned the text, a covenant renewal, not a sacrifice. The Luna who established it wasn't harmed. But it has to be freely given. Explicitly, if there's any coercion. There can't be any coercion, I said. I understand. I paused. Is there anything else the record says about what happens to the person who gives it? He read it a third time, carefully, the way he read everything, like the text was going to be held responsible for its own accuracy. It says the land remembers, he said finally. Whatever that means. I thought about Dorothy's words. The territory has acknowledged you for years. I think I know what it means. He looked at me steadily. Sophia, I need you to understand. I'm not ordering this. This pack does not require this of you. Whatever happened with Evelyn, whatever the founding history failed to do, I will not put this on you as an obligation. It's not an obligation, I said. It's a choice. Yes. And it's mine to make. Yes. I looked at the settlement record, still open on the table. The old handwriting, brown ink on foxed paper, the original definition that had been quietly kept alive by women, passing it woman to woman for 30 years because the official version had erased it, recognized by what she gives, without being asked. Then I'll do it, I said. The room was very quiet. Then the door opened behind me, and Logan walked in, stopped when he saw us both, registered the maps and documents spread across the table, and said, I'm either very late or very early for whatever this is. Both, Ethan said, and something in his voice had changed, a slight loosening of the controlled urgency, like something that had been wound very tight had been given one turn of relief. He looked at his brother. Close the door. We need to plan. Logan closed the door, came to the table, and looked at me. Really looked at me, the same way he had in the corridor yesterday, that unguarded directness that was so different from his usual performed ease. You found something. Sophia found everything, Ethan said. I wasn't prepared for how much those 3 words cost him to say, or what it meant that he said them anyway. Logan looked at the documents, then at me, then at the window where the sky was beginning to lighten, pre-dawn gray bleeding toward the cold pale gold of early morning. 3 days, he said. 3 days, Ethan confirmed. Logan pulled out a chair and sat down with the focused, sudden seriousness of someone setting down a performance they'd been carrying too long. Then we don't have time for the council to argue about procedure. He looked at Ethan. You know that. I know. They're going to push back. They always push back. Ethan's voice was even. It doesn't change what needs to happen. He looked at me again, and there it was. That full, unguarded attention that I'd been on the receiving end of for less than an hour, and was already starting to understand was not something he gave easily or often. Can you be ready by tonight? He asked. There's a preparatory ritual Dorothy will need to walk you through. The settlement record references it. Blood offering protocols. We should start now. I can be ready, I said. What I didn't say, because there was no space for it in this conversation, and no version of saying it that didn't sound like fear, was, I don't know if I'm the right person. I don't know if the territory will actually recognize me, or if Evelyn was wrong, or if Dorothy was wrong, or if I'm about to stand at the northern boundary stone in 3 days and offer my blood to an ancient debt and find out I was never what anyone thought. But that was the thing, wasn't it? That was always the thing, when you'd spent your entire life being adjacent. You never knew if you were enough until the moment that required you to be. Outside, the shimmer at the northern tree line was visible now even in the growing light. Pressing, patient, waiting. Chapter 5. Dorothy had a word for what we were doing. She called it threading. Not preparation, she said firmly, when Ethan used that word. Preparation implies you're getting ready for something external. Threading is different. Threading is finding the line that was always in you and learning to hold it without dropping it. We were in her cottage, all 4 of us, me, Ethan, Logan, and Dorothy, crammed into her small sitting room with the settlement record open on the low table between us. and the late morning light coming through windows that needed cleaning, but somehow still made everything look golden anyway. Dorothy had made more tea. Nobody had drunk it. Ethan had wanted to do this in the main house. Dorothy had declined with the particular gracious immovability of a very old woman who understood that she had more leverage than her rank suggested. "The main house has Evelyn's energy in the walls," she'd said simply. "We're not doing this there." Nobody argued. The settlement record's preparatory ritual was 3 pages long, and written in a hand that was different from the rest of the document. Smaller, more careful, like someone writing something they intended to last. Dorothy had read it twice through before she'd let anyone else see it, translating the archaic pack language with the ease of long familiarity. "Your grandmother taught you to read this?" Logan asked, watching her. "My grandmother taught me to read this, and her grandmother taught her, and so on back 4 generations. Dorothy didn't look up from the page. Knowledge kept in women's hands tends to stay intact. We don't have the luxury of assuming someone else is preserving it. Logan was quiet after that. The ritual itself was not what I expected. I think I'd been bracing for something ceremonial and painful. Candles and chanting, maybe. Something that looked like what people imagine when they imagine old pack magic. Something that announced itself. What Dorothy described was quieter than that. 3 components, she said, setting the record down and looking at me directly. First, the land acknowledgement. You walk Greymoor's inner boundary, not the full territory border, just the inner ring, the original settlement boundary, before sundown today. On foot, alone. No purpose except to walk it and be present in it. No phone, no company, no destination, except the walking itself. Why alone? Logan asked. Because the land needs to assess her without interference. Dorothy's tone was patient but final. You cannot vouch for her. Ethan cannot vouch for her. The territory makes its own determination. I thought about the shimmer at the northern tree line. The territory has acknowledged you for years. How will I know if it accepts it? The walk? Dorothy considered this. You'll feel it or you won't. I can't describe it more precisely than that, because every account uses different language. Warmth, weight, recognition. The original Luna described it as the land learning your name. She paused. Given how long you've been walking this territory, I don't anticipate it being a problem. And if it is a problem? Ethan asked. Dorothy looked at him steadily. Then we have a different conversation, but it won't be. She said it with such complete certainty that even Ethan, who trusted almost nothing that couldn't be verified, didn't push back. Second component, Dorothy continued. The speaking of intent. Tonight, before the moon rises, you speak your offering aloud. Not to the pack, not to me or Ethan, to the territory itself. You tell it what you're offering and why, freely, without qualification. What counts as qualification? I asked. Conditions, exceptions, any language that implies the offering is contingent on something. She held my gaze. The debt is unconditional. Your offering has to match it. I nodded slowly. Freely given. The letter had been clear. And the third component? The third is the night before the new moon itself. Dorothy folded her hands in her lap. The actual offering at the boundary stone. That one is more significant. We'll prepare for it specifically after the first 2 are done. She paused. 1 step at a time. She was being careful, I noticed. Deliberate in what she was and wasn't telling me, in what order. Which meant the third component was the one she was least certain about. Or the one she was most certain would frighten me if I understood it fully before I'd completed the first 2. I filed that away. When do I start the walk? I asked. Dorothy glanced at the window. The light was mid-morning now, the sun properly up. Now would be good. The inner boundary is approximately 4 hours on foot. You'll be back well before sundown. I stood up. Ethan stood too, reflexively, and then seemed to catch himself, made a deliberate choice to stay where he was. The deliberateness of it was somehow more considerate than if he'd simply remained seated, like he'd actively decided not to impose. I'll have food ready when you get back, Logan said. He said it with the ease of his usual register, but underneath it was something that was trying to be useful in the only way currently available to it. I recognized that impulse. It was my native language. Thank you, I said. Dorothy walked me to the door. At the threshold, she pressed something into my hand. Small, smooth, warm from her pocket. A river stone, dark gray, with a groove worn into one side from long handling. My grandmother carried this on her walks, she said. It helps sometimes to have something to hold. I closed my fingers around it. Then I stepped out into the morning and started walking. The inner boundary of Greymoor's original settlement was not marked on any of the modern territory maps. I knew where it was anyway. That's the thing I'd been trying not to examine too directly, the fact that I knew. Not because anyone had told me, not because I'd found it in a document or been shown it by my father or stumbled across a marker. I just knew the land in that specific way, the way you know the layout of your childhood home in the dark. You don't navigate it consciously, you navigate it the way breathing works, without deciding to. The inner boundary ran through the old settlement clearing first, the flat, grassy space at the center of Greymoor territory that the pack used for summer gatherings, and that had a quality of stillness to it that I'd always attributed to the age of the trees surrounding it. Then east through the section of forest where the original pack families had built their first homes, long since replaced but the foundations still visible if you knew where to look. Then south along the creek that ran through the lower territory, cold and clear year-round. Then west through the meadow section. Then north back up through the newer construction to the Great Hall and beyond. 4 hours, maybe more. I walked. The first hour was ordinary, just walking, the physical rhythm of it, the familiar weight of the forest around me, the specific quality of Greymoor's morning light filtering through trees I'd known my entire life, the stone warm in my hand, my own thoughts, which were loud and unhelpful for approximately the first 40 minutes, and then gradually, without my engineering it, went quiet. Not blank, just settled, the way water settles when you stop disturbing it. The second hour was when things started to change. I became aware of it slowly, not a sound, not a sight, more a shift in what I'd call the texture of the air, like the forest had been going about its own business and had gradually, incrementally, turned its attention toward me, not threatening, more like noticing. I kept walking. The creek section was where it happened properly. I was crossing the stepping stones, the ones my father had taken me across at age 7, the ones I'd crossed hundreds of times since, when I felt it. Dorothy had said people use different language for it. Warmth, weight, recognition. The original Luna had called it the land learning your name. What I felt was all of those, and also none of them, because none of those words were quite right for something that went deeper than language. It was like exhaling, a very long exhale. The kind you do when you've been holding your breath for so long you'd stopped noticing the tension until the moment it releases. Like the land had been waiting for something, and I had, without knowing it, spent 24 years bringing it closer, step by patient step. Like I was recognized. I stood on the stepping stones in the middle of the creek, with the cold water running over my boots, and the stone warm in my closed fist, and I cried. Briefly, without drama, the way you cry when something you'd stopped hoping for arrives anyway. Then I kept walking. The fourth hour brought me back north, through the trees behind the Great Hall, and that was where I found Camila Reyes. She was standing at the edge of the tree line, arms crossed, watching me emerge from the forest with an expression I couldn't immediately read. She was exactly as I'd always known her, composed, precise, beautiful in the specific way of someone who had been cultivated for a certain kind of attention since childhood. Dark hair, straight posture, the particular quality of self-possession that came, not from arrogance but from absolute certainty about one's own position. She'd been Evelyn's closest ally on the council's informal edge, not a ranked position. Camila's power in Greymoor had always operated in the unranked spaces, which I understood better than most. She was the one Evelyn had consulted before consulting the council. She was the one who had known, before anyone else, which way things were leaning. She was also the one who had spent 3 years making it quietly, expertly clear to anyone who cared to notice that when the time came for Greymoor to have a new Luna, the obvious choice was standing right there. And now the time had come. And the choice was apparently me. Sophia, she said. Camila. She looked at me for a long moment. I held it. I was tired from 4 hours of walking, and undone from the creek, and not in the mood for whatever performance was required here. I know what you're planning, she said. I assumed you would. And I know why Evelyn chose you. Something in her voice that I couldn't fully categorize. Not quite anger, not quite grief. I want you to know, I'm not here to interfere with it. That surprised me enough that I stopped. All right. I'm here because... She paused, and for the first time in all the years I'd watched Camila Reyes operate in Greymoor's political spaces, she looked uncertain. Not performed uncertainty. Real uncertainty. The kind that cost something. I helped Evelyn. With the cover. When she was meeting Thomas Reed at the border, I didn't know everything she knew, but I knew she was meeting someone, and I provided logistical support. Reasons for her absence. Misdirection when the scouts' schedules looked close. The creak was still audible behind me. The stone was still in my hand. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you're about to stand at the northern boundary stone and offer your blood for this pack. Her voice was very level. And you deserve to know the full shape of what you're doing it for, including the parts that aren't clean. She met my gaze. I helped her hide it. For months. Because I trusted her. And she was my friend. And I didn't ask enough questions. A pause. That's on me. And you should know it. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had wanted what I was apparently about to become. Who had just handed me a confession she didn't have to give. Did you know about the debt? I asked. The first debt. The renewal. No. Immediate. Certain. If I had known, I would have gone to Ethan. Whatever else I am not someone who lets this pack burn to protect a secret. I believed her. I didn't know if that was naive, but the creek section of the walk was still fresh in my bones, and something about standing in the land that had just spent 4 hours recognizing me made it harder to be strategic about people, made the truth feel more obvious. All right, I said again. She blinked. That's all? What did you want me to say? I don't know. She seemed genuinely uncertain. I thought you'd be angry. I am angry, I said, and I don't have time for it right now. And I think when this is over, we're going to need to have a longer conversation, about a lot of things. But right now I need to get back to Dorothy's, eat something, and speak my intent to the territory before the moon rises. Camila stared at me. Then something shifted in her expression, something that started as surprise, and settled into something that looked almost like relief. Or the beginning of it. Is there anything I can do? I thought about it, genuinely, not as a test. Yes, I said. The pack doesn't know what's coming yet. Ethan and Logan are going to have to tell them today. And when they do, people are going to be frightened, and some of them are going to argue, and some of them are going to push back hard. You know this pack's pressure points better than almost anyone. You know who needs to hear what and how. She was watching me carefully. Help Ethan manage that, I said. Not for me, for them, so that when tonight comes, the pack is holding itself together instead of fracturing. A long pause. I can do that, she said quietly. Good. I moved past her toward the compound, then stopped. Camila, she looked at me. For what it's worth, Evelyn trusted you because you were worth trusting. She just also wasn't worth trusting herself. Those are separate things. I didn't wait to see her expression. I kept walking. But I heard, very quietly, behind me, the sound of someone exhaling. A very long exhale. Like something that had been held too tight finally letting go. Chapter 6. Logan had made soup. I don't know why that was the thing that nearly broke me. The boundary walk hadn't broken me. Camila's confession hadn't broken me. Even the creek section with all its quiet devastation hadn't broken me. But I walked into Dorothy's cottage at 4 in the afternoon, exhausted in every layer of myself, and found Logan Voss standing at Dorothy's small stove stirring a pot of something that smelled like thyme and warmth, and something in my chest did a very embarrassing thing that I covered by sitting down quickly and staring at the table. Eat first, Dorothy said, appearing from the back room with the settlement record under her arm. Talk after. Nobody argued with that either. We ate in a quiet that was different from the morning's quiet. That one had been tense, full of information being processed and positions being established, and 4 people trying to work out the geometry of an unprecedented situation. This quiet was companionable, almost. The kind that comes after decisions have been made and the arguing is done, and what remains is just the human business of keeping bodies functional enough to do what needs doing. Logan asked me how the walk was. I said it went well. He nodded and didn't push, which was exactly right. I was learning that Logan's ease was not, as I'd always half assumed, a performance layered over shallowness. It was a performance layered over someone who paid close attention and had made a choice, somewhere along the way, to make the people around him comfortable enough to be honest. Different skill from Ethan's gravity, not lesser. Ethan ate without speaking, which was normal, but he sat at the table rather than at the work table with his maps, which was not. He was present in a way that was deliberate, like he had made a choice to be in the room rather than in the problem, and was actively maintaining it. I noticed. I didn't say anything about it. After the soup, Dorothy put the settlement record on the table and opened it to the section she'd been rereading in the back room. The speaking of intent, she said, is the component most accounts spend the least time on, because it seems simple. It isn't. She looked at me. Would you like to do it here, with us, or outside alone? What does the record recommend? The record says, witnessed. She tapped the page. The original account describes the first Luna speaking her intent in front of the pack's founding families. Not for their approval, just witnessed. There's a distinction. Why witnessed? Because intent spoken only to yourself can be revised, Dorothy said. Intent spoken in front of others becomes real, committed. The territory is listening either way. But the witnessing is for you as much as anything else. It makes it harder to second-guess yourself between now and the new moon. I looked around the table. Logan, watching me with that careful attention he'd been deploying all day. Ethan, still and present. Dorothy, steady as the old timber walls around us. Here, I said, with you. Dorothy nodded. Then, whenever you're ready, take your time. There's no script. The record is explicit about that. It's your words, your reasons, your offering. I wrapped my hands around my empty soup bowl. The stone from Dorothy's grandmother was in my pocket, still warm. I thought about what I wanted to say, tried to find the right beginning, and discovered, as I often did with things that mattered, that the right beginning was just the true one. I'm not doing this because I was chosen, I said. I want to be clear about that. Evelyn chose me, and Dorothy confirmed it, and I understand the founding record's definition, but that's not the reason. The room was very quiet. I'm doing it because this is my pack. I kept my voice level, not performed levelness, genuine. Not in a titled way, not in a ranked way. I have never been ranked here, and I've never been formally recognized by anything except the occasional supply roster. But this is the land where my father is buried. This is the forest I've been walking my entire life. These are the people I've watched and helped and worried about for 24 years from the edge of every room I was allowed into. I paused. They are mine, not because they belong to me, because I belong to them, even when they didn't know it. Logan made a small sound that he immediately controlled. I kept going. The debt isn't mine. I want to say that too, clearly. I didn't incur it. My family didn't incur it. And the people in this pack who are in danger had nothing to do with what was decided 30 years ago by people who thought they knew better than the founders. I looked at the settlement record, but debts don't care who incurred them. They care what's owed, and what's owed is what I can give. So I'm offering it. My voice was steady. I was slightly surprised by that, and then I wasn't, because the creek section had done something to me that I was still understanding, had settled something that had been unsettled for years. My blood at the northern boundary stone, before the new moon, freely, without conditions, not because I'm required to, not because someone asked me to, because this is what the land needs and I am, apparently, what the land recognizes, and I have spent 24 years being what this pack needed without anyone noticing, and I am not. I stopped. Took a breath. I am not bitter about that, I said, and then, more quietly, not anymore. The silence held for a moment. Then Dorothy said, softly, "The territory heard that." I looked at her. "How do you know?" She nodded toward the window. I turned. Outside Dorothy's garden, where the old settlement timber met the ground in roots that had been there longer than any living pack member, the shimmer that had been at the northern tree line all morning, that cold pressured thing that had been testing the wall, was still there. But it had pulled back. Not gone, not resolved, but back, a few feet, like something large had shifted its weight and taken one step away from the thing it had been pressing against. It knew we were working. "One step at a time," Dorothy said, and her voice carried the particular quality of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this specific moment, and was allowing themselves, carefully, to feel the first edge of relief. Ethan found me outside an hour later. I was in Dorothy's garden, sitting on the low stone wall that bordered the herb beds, watching the light go from gold to amber, to the first thin edge of early evening purple. The moon would rise in a few hours. Gibbous still, not yet new, but close enough that I could feel it the way I'd always been faintly aware of the moon without knowing why. Maybe I'd always known why. Maybe I'd just been carefully not looking at the knowing. He came and stood beside the wall. He didn't sit. Ethan rarely sat in informal settings, I'd noticed. He stood the way people stand when they're not sure they should be there and have decided to come anyway. "The pack meeting went well," he said. "Relatively." "Camila helped?" "Yes." A pause. I was surprised by that. "Don't be. She loves this pack. She always has." I looked at the amber light on the herb beds. She just thought loving it meant being at its center. She's recalibrating. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You're very generous to people who haven't been generous to you." "My father was a physician," I said. "He treated everyone who came through the door regardless of how they'd behaved on the way in. I watched him do it my entire childhood. It's structural at this point. I don't think I could stop if I tried. Your father was a good man. The best I've ever known." Another quiet. This one was different from the others. Less functional, less about information management. More like two people standing in the same place at the same time and finding that it wasn't uncomfortable. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." 6 years ago, I kept my voice even. "When I came to you about the southern border, you said you looked into it briefly and let Evelyn's explanation satisfy you." I paused. "What did she tell you?" He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might not answer. Then, "She said you were adjusting poorly to your father's death, that you'd been struggling, and that the isolation of your position in the pack was making it worse, and that you'd developed what she called an unhealthy preoccupation with her movements." A pause. She said it with a great deal of apparent concern for your well-being. The herb beds were very still in the fading light. "She was good at that," I said finally. Not with bitterness, just, accurately, performing concern. "Yes." His voice was tight in a way I hadn't heard before. "I know that now. I should have known it then. I should have verified independently, instead of accepting her framing." He paused. "I have been thinking, since this morning, about how many things I accepted her framing on. Over 15 years. The number is uncomfortable." I looked at him sideways. "You're not responsible for her choices." "No, but I'm responsible for my own judgment." And my judgment was compromised by, he stopped. "By what?" A long pause. "By wanting the performance to be real," he said quietly. "It's easier to lead a pack that has a functioning Luna. It's easier to manage a territory when you believe the person beside you is genuinely present. I wanted to believe she was what she appeared to be, and so He stopped again. I was not rigorous. The word rigorous was so thoroughly Ethan that I almost smiled, using an analytical framework to describe an emotional failure, managing the admission with the same precision he managed everything else. "She fooled almost everyone," I said. "For 15 years. That's not a failure of your specific judgment. That's a very skilled performance. You weren't fooled. I grew up in the same house with her. I had access to the back of the performance." I shifted on the wall. "And I was adjacent enough that she didn't bother to perform for me. The way people drop the face when they think the audience has gone." I paused. I was always the audience that didn't count, which meant I saw what the counting audience didn't. He turned to look at me then, directly, the full weight of that particular attention that I'd been on the receiving end of since this morning, and still hadn't found a comfortable way to hold. "I want to correct that," he said. "After this is over, formally, whatever it requires, ranking, recognition, a proper position in the pack structure, I want to correct the oversight." I looked at him. "That's not why I'm doing this." "I know it isn't." His voice was very certain. "Which is exactly why I want to do it." The light was almost gone now, the first stars coming through the darkening sky in ones and twos, the way they always did over Greymore. The territory was rural enough that you could actually see them, a thing I'd loved since childhood and never quite taken for granted. There's something else, I said, about the third component. I looked at him steadily. Dorothy is being careful about what she tells me, in stages, which means the boundary stone ritual is more significant than what she's said so far. Ethan met my gaze. I noticed that too. Do you know what it is? I read the full settlement record this afternoon while you were walking. His voice was careful. There's a section at the back, after the main ritual description. I waited. The offering doesn't just settle the debt, he said. According to the original account, it establishes a new bond between the Luna who gives it and the territory itself, permanent, irreversible. I held very still. What kind of bond? The record describes it as a tethering. The territory anchors to the Luna who renews the covenant. She becomes... He paused on the word, like he was making sure he had it right. She becomes of the land, in a way that's different from an ordinary pack bond. Deeper, more permanent. Is it dangerous? The original Luna lived to old age, he said. Healthy, active. The record describes her as thriving. A pause. But it is permanent. It binds you to Greymore in a way that cannot be undone. I looked at the herb beds. Dorothy's garden. The old timber walls behind me. The land that had, 4 hours ago, learned my name. Except, it had already known it. That was what the creek had felt like. Not introduction, recognition. Dorothy should have told me this morning, I said. Yes, no equivocation, she should have. She was afraid I'd refuse, he said. Or hesitate. Or make the decision differently if you understood the full weight of it. I sat with that for a moment. The slight anger of it. The understanding underneath the anger. Dorothy's 30 years of watching the truth be buried. Her lifetime of keeping the knowledge alive when no one in power would carry it. Her grandmother's stone, still warm in my pocket. She wasn't wrong that it was a large weight. She wasn't right that I should have been kept from it. When were you going to tell me? I asked Ethan. Tonight, he said, without hesitation. Before you slept. I was not going to let you go to that boundary stone without knowing the full cost. I looked at him. I will not make the same mistake twice, he said quietly, accepting a framing because it's easier. You deserve the complete truth, whatever you decide. The stars were properly out now. The moon rising, still gibbous, 3 days from new. I reached into my pocket and closed my fingers around Dorothy's stone, bound to this land permanently, tethered, of the territory in a way that couldn't be undone. I thought about the creek, the exhale, the recognition that wasn't introduction, because it had already been there. I thought about my father's grave in the Eastern Grove. I thought about 24 years of belonging to a place that had never formally said so. It's not a cost, I said finally. Ethan looked at me. It's not a cost, I said again. It's just true, made official. I let go of the stone. I was already bound to this land. I have been since I was 9 years old in that corridor, looking at Evelyn's portrait and knowing something was wrong, and not having any idea what to do with the knowing. I paused. Making it permanent just means it's honest. The garden was very quiet. Then Ethan said, in a voice that had something in it I hadn't heard before, something underneath the control, something that cost him to let through. I'm sorry. For 6 years ago. Not as an alpha making an institutional acknowledgement, as a person who failed to listen to someone who deserved to be heard. I looked at the stars. I know, I said. I believe you. That's more than I deserve. Probably. I stood up from the wall, brushing herb dust from my jacket. But I told you, structural generosity, occupational hazard. I heard, behind me, the approximation of a smile in his voice. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow, we prepare for the boundary stone. Tomorrow, I agreed. I walked back toward the cottage, Dorothy's stone in my hand, the stars overhead, the land quiet and present and known all around me. 2 days left. At the northern tree line, the shimmer held its distance, waiting. Chapter 7. I woke up the next morning knowing something had changed. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way. No bolt upright, no gasping, No sense of sudden revelation descending from the ceiling, just a quiet, immediate awareness, present before I was fully conscious. The way sometimes you wake up already knowing it's raining, before you've heard it or seen it. The knowledge is simply there, waiting for you to catch up to it. What had changed was the land. I lay still for a moment, eyes open in the gray pre-dawn, and felt it, the territory, present at the edges of my awareness in a way it hadn't been yesterday morning. Not overwhelming, not loud, more like a frequency I'd always been able to hear, faintly, that had overnight been turned up a precise and careful notch. Like something had been calibrated. The speaking of intent. Dorothy had said the territory was listening. Apparently it had also been responding, quietly, while I slept, making adjustments of its own. I pressed my hand flat against the mattress and felt, very faintly, the particular quality of Greymoor's soil through the floorboards, through the foundation of the guest room I'd been given in the main compound. The deep, old, mineral patience of land that had been here long before any wolf had thought to call it territory. "All right," I said to it, out loud, to my empty room, to the floorboards, to whatever was listening through them. It wasn't a full sentence. It didn't need to be. Dorothy arrived at the main compound at 7, carrying the settlement record and a basket that turned out to contain, improbably, fresh bread and a jar of honey from her own hives. She set these on the kitchen table without explanation, like bringing bread to the morning before a potentially world-altering ritual was simply what one did, and poured herself tea from the pot Logan had already made. Logan, to his credit, said nothing about the bread, just cut himself a slice with the comfortable ease of a man who has decided that if things are going to be strange and high stakes, they might as well involve fresh bread. I sat down across from Dorothy. "You should have told me about the permanent bond," I said, not with anger, just directly, the way Dorothy herself had modeled. She met my gaze without flinching. "Yes," she said, "I should have. I made a judgment call that was not mine to make." "Why?" She wrapped her hands around her teacup. "Because I have been keeping this knowledge alive for 30 years, and in 30 years I have watched every attempt to act on it fail. Not for lack of information, but for lack of will. People understand the cost, and they step back, and the knowledge goes back in the drawer." She paused. "I was afraid that if I told you the full weight of it, before the land had a chance to confirm what I already knew about you, you would step back too." "I wouldn't have. I know that now." Her gray eyes were steady and entirely undefensive. "I knew it then too, if I'm honest. But 30 years of watching the truth get buried makes a person overcautious about the conditions under which they reveal it." A pause. "I was wrong. I apologize." I looked at her for a moment. This small, ancient, fierce woman who had carried a secret for 3 decades because nobody in power had been willing to hear it. "Accepted," I said. "Don't do it again." "I won't have reason to," she said. "After tomorrow night, the knowledge will be settled. Into the land. Into you. It won't need keeping anymore." Logan, who had been quietly eating his bread and monitoring the conversation with the focused attention he'd been applying to everything since this started, said, "What exactly happens to the thing at the border? After the renewal? Does it leave?" Dorothy considered this. "The original account says it returns to dormancy. It doesn't cease to exist. It's old. Older than the pack, older than the territory's formal establishment. It was here before us, and will likely be here after. The covenant doesn't destroy it. It reestablishes the agreement." "What was the agreement?" I asked. "That Greymoor's Luna acknowledges it, regularly, with blood freely given." Dorothy's voice was matter-of-fact. "It's not malevolent exactly. It's territorial, in the original sense. It has a claim on this land that predates the Pack's claim. The first debt was the founding Luna's way of saying, 'We know you're here. We respect the prior claim. We offer this acknowledgement in exchange for peaceful coexistence.' When the acknowledgement stops, the prior claim reasserts itself," Ethan said from the doorway. He'd been there for the last few minutes. I'd heard him arrive but hadn't turned, had known it was him the way you know, in a familiar space, who's just walked in from the sound of their particular footstep. He came to the table and sat, the settlement record open in front of him, and there were new notes in the margins in his handwriting from last night's reading. "Like a landlord whose tenant stopped paying rent," Logan said. Dorothy gave him a look that somehow managed to be both reproving and approving simultaneously. A rather reductive analogy, but functionally, yes. So after tomorrow night, Logan continued, assuming everything goes correctly, the pack is safe, long-term? The renewal lasts a generation, Dorothy said. The founding record specifies 25 to 30 years, depending on how deeply the covenant is established. After that, a renewal will be needed again. By whoever is Luna at that point, I said. By whoever the land recognizes at that point, Dorothy corrected gently. Which, given what the tethering does, given that you will be permanently of this territory after tomorrow night, may well be the same person. The kitchen was quiet for a moment while everyone processed that particular implication. You'll be here in 30 years, Logan said, looking at me. Not a question. An observation, delivered with the particular quality of someone finding something unexpectedly solid in uncertain ground. Apparently, I said. The day had a specific texture to it, the particular quality of a day that knows it's the last ordinary one before something changes. Everyone in the compound felt it. The pack felt it. You could see it in the way they moved through the morning, deliberate, present, checking in with each other in small ways. A hand on a shoulder, a longer than usual greeting. The way people behave when they've been told something is coming and have decided, collectively, to be good to each other while they wait. Ethan had told them the previous evening, all 300 of them, in the great hall, standing at the head of the long table that had always been Evelyn's territory, and speaking with that steady gravity that was simply him, always him, not a performance, the actual weight of the man. He'd told them about the debt, about the border anomalies and what they meant, about the new moon and what the renewal required, about the founding record and the original Luna's covenant. He'd told them about me. I hadn't been in the room. I'd been with Dorothy, preparing, going through the ritual details, memorizing the spoken components, learning the approach to the northern boundary stone that the founding record described. But Logan had been in the hall, and he'd come to Dorothy's cottage afterward and described it to me with a quietness that meant it had moved him. He said you'd been tending this pack your entire life, Logan said, quietly, without recognition, and that what was about to happen was the land formally acknowledging what had always been true. I'd stared at the settlement record and not said anything for a moment. How did they respond? I asked. Quietly at first. Logan paused. And then, Reese from the northern quarter stood up. She's 18, been in the pack her whole life. Her family has been here 4 generations. She said she knew who you were. Said you'd helped her mother through a difficult birth 2 years ago when the pack physician was occupied elsewhere. Said you'd stayed the whole night. I remembered that. Margaret, Reese's mother. Difficult presentation, long labor. The physician called away to a border injury that turned out to be less serious than reported. I'd stayed because there was no one else, and Margaret was frightened, and I knew enough of my father's training to be useful. And then others started saying similar things. Logan continued. Hayden from the Eastern Quarter. You helped his daughter when she was struggling after her first shift. Sandra from the Elder Housing. She said you brought food to the older pack members during the bad winter 3 years ago, when the supply distribution got backlogged. Joseph from the Medical Auxiliary said you've been assisting with pack health events for a decade without any formal role. I listened to this list of ordinary things I'd done because they needed doing and no one else was doing them, and felt something complicated in my chest. And then they were all talking, Logan said, all at once. About things you'd done that they'd never connected to each other before, because they'd never had reason to. You'd just been there, adjacent. And then Ethan let them talk for a while, and when they quieted he said, She has been your Luna in every way that matters. Tomorrow night the land makes it official. I was quiet for a long moment. I'm glad I wasn't in the room, I said. Why? Because I would have cried. I kept my voice very level, and I'm trying to keep that for private moments. Logan was quiet for a beat. Then, gently, this is a private moment. I looked at him. He was right. It was just the 2 of us in Dorothy's kitchen, the lamp low, the settlement record between us, the rest of the compound quiet outside. As private as the last day before everything changed was likely to get. So I let the thing in my chest move through me properly, briefly, the way the creak had, and then I put it away and straightened up and picked up the settlement record. Show me the section on the approach path again, I said. I want to have it memorized before morning. At midday, Camila came to find me. I was in the Eastern Memorial Grove, my father's grave, a deliberate choice, the last quiet place I knew how to find before the quiet ran out. She approached carefully, the way people approach someone in a cemetery, with the specific respect the space commands. She sat beside me on the grass without asking. I didn't object. For a while we were both quiet. I've been thinking about what you said, she said finally, yesterday, about Evelyn trusting me because I was worth trusting. And I think you were being kind. She paused, more kind than accurate. Tell me what you think the accurate version is. She pulled at a blade of grass, systematic, like she needed something to do with her hands. I think Evelyn trusted me, because I was ambitious, and she was useful to my ambition, and those two things suited each other for a long time. I told myself it was friendship. I think it was mostly alignment of convenience. A pause. Real friendship would have involved asking more questions. I considered this. Maybe both things were true. Maybe. She didn't sound convinced. I wanted to be Luna, she said, more quietly. I want you to know that I'm aware of how that colors everything. My judgment, my choices, what I was willing to overlook. She looked at my father's headstone. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm just naming it. So there isn't a version where you find out later and feel like I wasn't honest. I looked at the headstone too. Daniel Dane, healer, father, friend to all who needed one. My father used to say that the most trustworthy people weren't the ones who never wanted things for themselves, I said. They were the ones who knew what they wanted and could still tell the truth about it. Camila was quiet. You're being very... Don't say generous, I said. Logan already used that word and I'm getting self-conscious about it. Something shifted in her face, almost a smile, the first genuinely unguarded expression I'd ever seen from Camila Reyes, in all the years I'd known her from the edges of rooms. All right, she said. I was going to say, you're being very much your father's daughter. I looked at the headstone. Yes, I said. I know. I'm trying to be. We sat in the grove for a while longer without speaking. Two women in the space between what had been and what was coming. The land quiet around us, present, waiting. When I finally stood to go, Camila said, I'll be there tomorrow night, at the boundary stone. She met my gaze. The whole pack will be. Ethan is organizing it. They want to witness. I thought about 300 people in the dark, at the northern boundary stone, watching me offer something of myself to a debt I hadn't incurred for a pack that had spent 24 years not quite seeing me. I thought about the creek, the exhale, the land learning your name. It already knew my name. Tomorrow night, everyone else would too. All right, I said, and walked back through the grove toward the compound. My father's grave behind me, the territory present and certain all around me, the new moon one day away. At the northern tree line, the shimmer held. Patient, ancient, almost expectant. As if it too had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally show up and do what was owed. Chapter 8. The day of the new moon arrived without fanfare. No dramatic weather, no significant portent in the sky. Just a Tuesday in autumn, with a low gray ceiling of cloud that diffused the light into something flat and even, and oddly peaceful. The kind of day that doesn't announce itself, that simply proceeds with quiet intention, like it knows it doesn't need theater to be significant. I woke before dawn again. The territory was louder this morning, not in a frightening way, not the pressing, testing quality of the shimmer at the northern tree line, which had been steadily building pressure for 2 weeks. This was different. This was expectant, the particular quality of something that has been patient for a very long time and can now, finally, feel the end of the waiting. I lay still and let it move through my awareness, learning its texture, getting used to carrying it. Because after tonight, I'd be carrying it permanently. I pressed my hand flat on the mattress again, the way I'd done yesterday morning. Greymoor's soil through the floorboards, through the foundation, that deep mineral patience. I'm coming, I told it. Tonight. The land said nothing back, because land doesn't speak. But the frequency shifted, very slightly, in a way that felt like acknowledgement. I got up, dressed carefully. Nothing ceremonial, nothing performed. My own clothes, worn and familiar. The stone from Dorothy's grandmother in my pocket. My father's watch on my wrist, the one he'd worn every day of my childhood. The one I'd been given the morning after his funeral by a pack elder who'd said he'd wanted me to have it specifically. The watch read 5:43. 14 hours until the new moon. Dorothy arrived at 6 with the settlement record for the last time. She sat across from me at the main house kitchen table, just the two of us this time, deliberately, and opened the record to the final section, the one that described the boundary stone ritual in full, the one she'd been building toward since the first morning. She read it aloud, all of it. Then she read the section on the permanent bond. Then she looked at me and said, "Do you have questions?" "Yes," I said. "One. Ask it." The original Luna, the one who established the first debt. The record says she thrived after the tethering, but it also says it changed her. I kept my voice even. How? Dorothy was quiet for a moment. The accounts say she became more, not different in her fundamental self, more of what she already was. The tethering amplifies, apparently. Whatever the Luna carries going into the bond, care, strength, perception, the specific quality of her attention, becomes deeper afterward, more present. She paused. Given what you carry, what you've always carried, I suspect what the tethering does to you specifically will be more of the same, I said. More of the same, she agreed. The watching, the knowing, the ability to tend what needs tending before anyone else has identified the need. She closed the record gently. Which the pack desperately needs, particularly now. I looked at the closed record. All that knowledge, kept alive woman to woman for 30 years, because the official history had decided it was inconvenient. What happens to the record after tonight? I asked. Dorothy considered this. That depends on what you want. It should be in the official archive, I said. All of it. The original definition of Luna, the first debt, the renewal schedule, the tethering, all of it. Formally documented, not kept in someone's private collection because the pack leadership decided it was inconvenient. Ethan will agree to that, Dorothy said. I know. I'm not asking Ethan, I'm telling you. Because this is knowledge that belongs to the pack, and it's been kept alive by women who understood that, and those women deserve to be credited for the keeping. I paused. Their names should be in the record. Yours, your grandmother's, her grandmother's, all of them. Dorothy looked at me for a long moment. Then she did something I hadn't seen her do in all the time I'd known her. She cried. Not dramatically, one tear, very quickly controlled, gone almost before it arrived, but real, the kind that comes from being seen after a very long time of being looked past. One step at a time, I said gently, using her own words back to her. She laughed, brief and genuine, wiped her eye with the back of her wrist. Yes, she said. All right, one step at a time. The hours between morning and evening moved with the particular slowness of days that matter. Logan spent most of it organizing the pack's presence at the boundary stone. Logistics, timing, the specific arrangement of 300 people at the Northern Territory edge at midnight. He did it with the focused, practical energy of someone who needs to be useful to manage the thing they're feeling, which I understood completely. Ethan spent it reviewing the settlement record one final time, and then, in the afternoon, doing something I didn't expect. He came to find me in the Eastern Grove again, where I'd gone to sit with my father's grave one more time, and he sat down beside me without explanation, and stayed for 2 hours without speaking more than a handful of words. He was simply present, the way he'd been at the dinner table yesterday morning, a deliberate choice to be in the room rather than in the problem. I found, sitting beside his silence, that it was not uncomfortable. It was, actually, the most restful thing I'd experienced in days. At one point I said, without planning to, my father would have liked you. Ethan looked at me. He had very little patience for performance, I said. He could always tell when someone was showing him a version of themselves constructed for consumption. He didn't distrust those people necessarily. He just found them exhausting. I paused. He wouldn't have found you exhausting. A long quiet. I find most people exhausting, Ethan said, not apologetically. Just accurately. I know, I said. It's because you're paying attention to all of it at once, the surface and the underneath simultaneously. That's a tiring way to move through the world. He looked at me with that full, unguarded attention. You do the same thing. Yes, I said. I know. My father did it too. I think it might be why he was so good at medicine. He was always reading several layers at once, the presenting symptom and the actual problem and the emotional weight of the person carrying both. I turned the watch on my wrist. He used to say the hardest part of being a healer wasn't knowing what to do. It was knowing what people needed to hear about what you were doing and when. That's true of leading a pack, Ethan said. I imagine it is. Another quiet. The eastern grove dappled and still around us, the low gray sky holding its clouds. After tonight, Ethan said carefully, the formal recognition I mentioned, ranking, title, official position, I want to discuss it properly, with you, not as a unilateral decision from my desk, a conversation. All right. There's a council seat, he said, currently unoccupied. There's also the Luna title itself, which is different, more significant, more public. A pause. I don't want to make assumptions about which you'd want, or whether either suits you. I looked at my father's headstone. After tonight, I said, I think the question of what title I hold will be somewhat academic. The land will have answered it. I paused. But I appreciate that you're asking instead of deciding. I won't stop making decisions, he said. That's the nature of the position. I know, but there's a difference between deciding things that are yours to decide and deciding things that are mine. I looked at him. You understand that difference. I'm learning it, he said, honest, direct, no performance of certainty he didn't have, more clearly than I did a week ago. We sat until the light began to shift toward evening. Then Ethan stood, offered me a hand up from the grass, a simple, practical gesture, nothing performed in it, and we walked back to the compound together, in comfortable silence. At 10 o'clock, Dorothy came to my room. She brought the stone, her grandmother's river stone, which I'd been carrying, and which she now took back and held in both hands for a moment, before pressing it into mine one final time. Keep it tonight, she said. Bring it back after. She checked that I had the spoken components memorized. I did. She reminded me of the approach path. I had it. She looked at me for a long moment, this small ancient woman who had carried a truth for 30 years, until the right person arrived to receive it. You're ready, she said. Not a question, not encouragement, a statement of observed fact, delivered with the authority of someone who knew the difference between telling people what they wanted to hear and telling them what was true. I know, I said. She nodded once, and left. We went north at 11:30. All of us, the entire pack, 300 wolves moving through the dark in a quiet that was not silence but something more intentional. No torches, no ceremony, just the pack, moving together through their own territory toward their northern edge, in the dark of a moonless sky. New moon, no light, just stars and the particular quality of a sky that had turned its lamp off. I walked at the front with Ethan on my left and Logan on my right, and Dorothy just behind. Camila was somewhere in the pack. I could feel her there without looking, the specific quality of her presence, careful and present and no longer performing anything. The northern tree line was ahead, and beyond it, the shimmer, present, enormous, now that we were close. Not threatening in the way a predator threatens, more like the way a tide threatens, massive and impersonal, and utterly indifferent to whether you were afraid of it. It didn't want to hurt the pack. It just wanted what was owed. The boundary stone was where the settlement record said it would be, a large, flat-topped granite boulder at the exact northern edge of the original settlement boundary, older than any living pack member, older than the pack itself, weathered smooth on top, dark with old lichen, and at its center, barely visible in the starlight, a shallow depression worn into the granite surface. For the blood. I stopped in front of it. The pack stopped behind me, spreading out along the tree line in a long, quiet arc. 300 wolves in the dark, present, witnesses. I heard them breathing, felt them through the territory, each one a distinct note in the frequency I'd been hearing more clearly since the speaking of intent. 300 people I'd spent 24 years tending from the edges of every room. My pack. I took the stone from my pocket, held it, breathed. Then I placed the stone at the base of the boundary stone, Dorothy's grandmother's river stone, dark and smooth and kept warm by 4 generations of careful hands, and straightened up. "I know you're here," I said to the shimmer, out loud, clear voice in the dark. "I know what you're owed and why, and I know it should have been given sooner, and I'm sorry for the years it wasn't. That wasn't my failure, but I'm answering for it anyway, because this is my pack, and this is my land, and I am—" My voice was steady. I want that on record. My voice was completely steady. "I am what this land recognizes, and I offer freely what the first debt requires. My acknowledgement, my blood, my permanent presence in this territory, as its Luna, in the oldest sense of that word, not appointed, not ranked, recognized by what I give without being asked." The shimmer was very still. I pressed the pad of my thumb against the edge of the boundary stone, sharp granite, old and honest, and drew it across with enough pressure to break skin cleanly. The pain was brief and small and real. I pressed my bleeding thumb to the depression in the granite, and spoke the final words, the ones from the settlement record, translated from the original pack language, the ones Dorothy's grandmother's grandmother had kept alive when the official history tried to let them die. "First debt freely paid, land and Luna bound again. I am of this place, and this place is of me, now and through what comes after." For a moment, nothing. The dark, the stars, the pack breathing behind me. My thumb on cold granite, warm blood in the depression. And then, the shimmer moved. Not away, not attacking. It moved the way smoke moves when a window opens, dispersing, redistributing, losing its coherence as a gathered thing, and becoming something else. Something that spread outward along the boundary in both directions, following the line of the original settlement's edge, moving fast and purposeful, like water finding the channels it was always meant to fill. The wall, reinforcing itself, the covenant, renewed. And simultaneously, the tethering. I'd thought I understood what Dorothy had described. I'd thought the creek section had prepared me for it. The exhale, the recognition, the land knowing my name. I had not understood. What the tethering felt like was arriving. After a very long journey I hadn't known I was making, setting down weight I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped feeling it as weight and started feeling it as just the shape of myself. The territory didn't just recognize me, it received me, folded me in with the same patient certainty that it held the old-growth trees and the creek and the memorial grove and Dorothy's garden, permanent, irrevocable, real. I stood at the boundary stone with my blood on the granite and my thumb pressed to the old debt and felt myself become, finally and completely, of this place. Behind me, the pack was very still. Then someone made a sound, one person, somewhere in the arc of 300, that was not quite a word and not quite a cry, just a sound, the kind humans and wolves both make when something true happens in front of them, that they have no language for. And then others, and then more. Not cheering, nothing so bright as that, not in the dark, not on a night this serious, but sound, present, collective, real, the sound of a pack feeling something shift back into place that had been wrong for a very long time. I lifted my thumb from the granite. The shimmer was gone. The northern tree line was just trees, dark and still and ordinary and completely, peacefully quiet. I turned around. 300 wolves in the dark, some of them people I knew well, most of them people I knew adjacently, all of them people I'd been tending without acknowledgement for 2 decades. Looking at me. Ethan was in the front, steady and still, as always, but something in his face was different. That fractional loosening around the eyes that I'd learned to read as emotion he'd decided to let through. Logan beside him, not performing ease for once, just present, eyes bright in the starlight. Dorothy, small and straight and fierce, her grandmother's stone at the base of the boundary stone behind me. Camila, in the second row, her careful composure finally fully set down, just a woman in the dark, watching something true. Reese from the northern quarter, who had stood up in the great hall and said she knew who I was. Hayden from the eastern quarter. Sandra from the elder housing. Joseph from the medical auxiliary. All the people whose small moments had added up unnoticed, into 24 years of tending. They were all looking at me. And for the first time in my life, in my entire life, I did not feel adjacent. I felt central. Not in the way Evelyn had been central, constructed and performed and hollow underneath. In the other way, the original way, the way the settlement record had defined it before the official history came along and made it something smaller. The thing that tends the bond between pack and land. Not appointed, not ranked. Recognized by what she gives without being asked. Ethan took one step forward, just one, and in the particular language of a man who doesn't waste gesture, that single step said everything that a longer speech would have taken the edge off. "Luna," he said. One word, quiet, in the dark, to me. And then, 300 people. Luna. Not a chant, not a performance. Each voice saying it separately, in their own time, the way people speak truth rather than recite it. Overlapping, layered, genuine. I stood at the northern boundary stone with the first debt paid, and the covenant renewed, and the territory permanently folded around me like something that had always been true, but had needed this specific night to become undeniable. And I did not cry. I had promised myself the creek. But I breathed. One long, complete, shaking exhale, and let it be enough. Later, after the pack had begun to move back toward the compound in ones and twos and small, quiet groups, after Dorothy had retrieved her grandmother's stone and pressed it into my hands to keep. She'd want you to have it now, I think. After Logan had said something so precisely right and brief that I didn't trust myself to respond to it, Ethan came and stood beside me at the boundary stone. The northern tree line behind us, dark and ordinary and quiet. The pack ahead, moving home. "How do you feel?" he asked. I considered the question genuinely, ran an honest inventory. Tired, deeply, thoroughly tired in every layer. Physical, emotional, whatever layer it is that the tethering had reached into and permanently rearranged. A good kind of tired. The kind that means something real was done. Present. More present than I'd ever felt in my life. The territory in my awareness like a compass always oriented. The pack's 300 lives like distinct notes in a frequency I could finally hear clearly. Not overwhelming, clarifying. And underneath all of that, something simple. Something I didn't have a word for more precise than right. "Like I've been holding my breath for 24 years, I said, and just stopped. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "The pack meeting tomorrow," he said. "There will need to be formal discussions. Title, council seat, the official record being updated, the archival changes you specified." "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. We stood for another moment in the dark at the northern edge of Greymore territory, the new moon invisible above its cloud cover, the stars doing what they always did over this land, unhurried and constant and present. Sophia, my name in his voice. In that register I was still learning, the one underneath the controlled steadiness, the one that cost something. I looked at him. "Thank you," he said, simply, without qualification, without the careful management that usually kept his words at a controlled distance from what he meant. I held it for a moment, the simple weight of being genuinely thanked by someone who chose their words the way he chose his, meaning exactly what he said, no more, no less. "You're welcome," I said, and meant that exactly too. Chapter 9. I slept for 11 hours. Not the fragmented surface-level sleep of the previous 3 nights. Not the half-awake vigil of a person bracing for something. Deep sleep, the kind that pulls you under completely and doesn't negotiate. I went to bed at 2 in the morning after the boundary stone, and woke at 1 in the afternoon to pale autumn sunlight coming through my window, at an angle that told me the day was already well underway without me. I lay still for a moment, taking inventory the way I always did now. The territory, present and steady in my awareness, the pack's collective frequency quieter in the daytime, people going about their ordinary lives. I could feel the difference already from yesterday. The shimmer was gone. The pressure that had been building at the northern edge for 2 weeks, that cold, ancient testing of the wall, was absent. In its place was something that wasn't quite silence, and wasn't quite sound. More like the quality of a room after a long-held argument is finally resolved. The particular piece of things being as they should be. I pressed my hand to the mattress. The land said, "Here, still here," Still yours. Good morning, I told it. Then I got up, wrapped myself in the quilt, and went to find coffee. The main compound kitchen was empty except for a note on the table in Logan's handwriting. Council meeting at 3. Ethan says you don't have to come if you're not ready. I say you should come because watching you be unimpressed by council procedure will be the highlight of my week. Food in the oven. L. Underneath that, in different handwriting, neater, more controlled. The archive staff have been notified about the record changes. Dorothy's list of names is being compiled. Take your time this morning. E. I stood in the kitchen in my quilt reading these 2 notes and felt something so ordinary and so enormous simultaneously that I had to sit down. This was what it felt like to be seen. Not the boundary stone, not 300 voices in the dark. Those were significant and real, and I would carry them always. But this. 2 notes on a kitchen table. One practical, one warm, both addressing me as someone whose needs and timeline and comfort mattered enough to consider without being asked. Take your time this morning. 24 years of being adjacent, of existing in the spaces between people's attention, of being the one who tended without anyone noting the tending, and now 2 men had left notes on a kitchen table that assumed, as a matter of ordinary course, that my morning mattered. I sat with that for a while. Then I found the food in the oven, eggs, kept warm, with bread from yesterday's basket, and ate it at the kitchen table alone, and let the morning be what it was. Dorothy arrived at noon, which I suspected was coordinated rather than coincidental. She brought her grandmother's stone, the one she'd pressed into my hands the night before to keep, and set it on the table between us, not taking it back, just acknowledging it, including it in whatever this conversation was going to be. How do you feel? She asked. Everyone keeps asking me that. Because no one has done this in 30 years, and we're all paying attention to the data points, she said, unabashedly. How do you feel? Rested, I said. Present. The territory is, I searched for the right word, settled. It doesn't feel like it did before, when I was just aware of it faintly. It's more integrated now. More constant. She nodded, making the small, satisfied movement of someone whose calculations have been confirmed. Any discomfort? My thumb is sore. She almost smiled. Besides that. No, I said. Honestly, it's... Dorothy, it doesn't feel like something was done to me. It feels like something was done with me. Like the land and I negotiated, and we both got what we came for. She looked at me for a long moment. Then... That's exactly how the original account describes it. Almost word for word. She paused. I've read that account dozens of times. I've never had anyone to compare it to before. Something in those words, I've never had anyone to compare it to, landed with the particular weight of a life spent being the keeper of knowledge that no one was receiving. You should write your own account, I said. Everything you know, everything you remember, everything your grandmother told you. Not as an addendum to the founding record, as its own document. Your voice. She looked at her hands, folded around her teacup. I'm 81, she said. I know, start this afternoon. She looked up at me. I'll help you, I said. We'll do it together, however long it takes. Dorothy held my gaze for a moment. Then she did something I was going to have to get used to. She smiled. A real one, unguarded. The kind that reorganized her entire face and showed me a glimpse of the young woman she'd been, 30 years ago, sitting across from an alpha who hadn't listened. All right, she said, this afternoon. The council meeting at 3 was everything Logan had promised. 7 wolves around the long table, most of them older, all of them attempting to manage the very specific discomfort of people who have spent years operating in a framework that has just been fundamentally altered. They were not hostile. I want to be accurate about that. Whatever fear or skepticism they might have had, last night at the Boundary Stone had done what the Boundary Stone was apparently designed to do. The pressure that had been building for 2 weeks was gone. The territory was settled. The evidence was literal, sensory, not a matter of argument. But they were adjusting. And adjusting, for people who have spent decades certain of the shape of things, is uncomfortable work. Richard, the eldest council member, 70 years old, pack-born, had served under 3 alphas, opened with the procedural question of title. He was scrupulously polite about it in the way of someone who is being polite because they've decided to be, not because it comes naturally. The Luna title carries specific historical precedent, he said. Formal investiture, council ratification, documented mate bond in most recorded cases. The founding record defines Luna without reference to mate bond, I said. A brief silence. You've read it, Richard said. I have the original text memorized, I said. Would you like me to quote it? Another silence. Logan, to my left, was doing something with his face that suggested he was working very hard not to look as entertained as he was. That won't be necessary, Richard said, with the tone of someone recalibrating rapidly. I'm simply noting that the formal process. Richard, Ethan's voice, even and final in the particular way that ended discussions without raising volume. The land has already ratified. The formal process is documentation of what occurred last night, not a separate determination. He looked at Richard steadily. We're here to discuss implementation, not eligibility. Richard looked at Ethan, then at me, then back at Ethan, with the expression of a man who has just understood that the landscape has changed and he needs to update his map. Implementation, he said. Yes, of course. The rest of the meeting was, if not smooth, at least functional. Council seat. Yes. Formally documented, effective immediately. Luna title. Yes. Formal investiture to be scheduled within the month. Traditional ceremony. Pack-wide. Archive updates. Ethan confirmed that the complete founding record, including the previously suppressed sections, would be integrated into the official pack history, and that Dorothy's document would be commissioned as an official historical text. That last one produced a small, brief silence from the council. Then Margaret, the eldest woman on the council, 74, who had been quiet through most of the meeting, said, "It should have been done 30 years ago, and that was that." I made a note to tell Dorothy. Afterward, when the council had filed out with varying degrees of adjustment still in progress, Richard paused at the door. He turned to look at me with the expression of someone who has decided to say something they hadn't planned to. "Your father," he said. "He was a good man. He served this pack well." "Yes," I said. "He did." "The apple," Richard said, somewhat gruffly, "does not appear to have fallen far." Then he left before I could respond, which I suspected was deliberate. Logan looked at me. Was that Richard's version of a speech of welcome? "I think it was Richard's version of an apology," I said. "Close enough," Logan said. "I found Camila in the late afternoon, in the corridor outside the Great Hall. She was standing in front of Evelyn's portrait. I came and stood beside her. We both looked at it, the luminous certainty, the open hand, the deliberate absence of warmth, the perfectly constructed face that had looked out over this corridor for 15 years while the truth moved quietly underneath it. "What happens to it?" Camila asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's Ethan's decision, and the council's. What would you want?" I looked at the portrait for a long moment. Evelyn in her painted perfection, caught at the edge of the forest at dusk, looking like someone who always knew which way the wind was turning. "I think it should stay," I said. Camila looked at me sharply. "Not as a tribute," I said. "As a record. She was Luna for 15 years. That happened. The pack's history includes it, including everything that went wrong in it. Taking the portrait down would be tidying the past, making it easier to forget what complacency costs." Camila was quiet for a moment. "You're going to be a very uncomfortable Luna," she said, "for the people who prefer comfortable." "Yes," I said, "I know." "Good," she said it simply, without irony. "Then, I've been thinking about what you asked me to do. Managing the pack's response, helping Ethan communicate. I want to continue doing that. Formally. Not as an informal influence. An actual position. You should talk to Ethan about that." "I will." A pause. "I wanted to tell you first. Because you're the one who saw it as a skill worth using, rather than an ambition worth managing." I looked at her. This woman who had wanted what the land had given me, who had helped hide something she shouldn't have, who had sat in my father's grove and told the truth about herself without being asked. "It is a skill worth using," I said. "This pack needs people who understand its pressure points. Use them well." She nodded once. Then she looked at the portrait one more time. She wasn't entirely wrong about everything, Camila said quietly. She understood pack politics. She understood optics. She understood how to hold a room. A pause. She just didn't understand that none of that matters if you're not actually there for the people. No, I said. It doesn't. We stood for another moment in front of the portrait. Two women on the other side of something enormous, finding their footing in what came after. Then Camila straightened, arranged herself with her old precision, but differently now, lighter, like someone wearing familiar clothes that finally fit properly, and said, "Council meeting tomorrow morning. Richard is going to try to insert a procedural delay on the archive updates." "How do you know?" "Because I know Richard," she said simply. "He'll frame it as due diligence. It isn't. It's discomfort looking for a process to hide in." "What do you suggest?" "Let me talk to him tonight," she said. Informally. "I know which arguments land with him." A pause. "Luna." She said the word the way the pack had said it at the boundary stone. Not a chant, not a performance. Just true. Then she walked down the corridor, and I stood alone in front of Evelyn's portrait, and the land was steady and present around me, and the pack was going about its evening in the ordinary ways of people whose crisis has passed, and whose ordinary life is resuming. I looked at the portrait one more time. "I hope you're somewhere peaceful," I said to it. To her. To whatever Evelyn was now, wherever she'd gone. "I hope you found what you were actually looking for." Then I turned and walked toward the kitchen, because Logan had mentioned something about dinner, and the land was calm, and tomorrow there was work to do. Ethan found me after dinner. We walked the perimeter of the compound, not the full boundary, just the inner loop, the route that passed the Memorial Grove and the old settlement clearing, and Dorothy's cottage and back. An ordinary walk in the evening dark, quiet and companionable. "Camila spoke to Richard," he said at one point. "I know, she told me she would." It was effective. It usually is, when she uses it for the right things. He was quiet for a moment. "You have good instincts about people." "I've had a lot of time to observe them," I said, "from the edges of rooms." "You're not on the edges anymore." I looked at the trees as we passed the Memorial Grove, my father's grave somewhere in the dark. "No," I said, "I'm not." We walked in comfortable silence for a while. The territory was warm around me, not physically, just in the way it was now, the frequency of it present and steady and mine. The pack was settling into sleep, the individual notes of their lives quieting for the night. "There's something I want to ask you," Ethan said, when we were almost back to the main compound. "Ask it." A pause. The particular pause of someone who has decided to say something and is choosing the precise form of it carefully. "The mate bond," he said. "I want to be clear that I'm not. This is not a precondition for anything. The title is yours, the council seat is yours, the tethering is permanent regardless. I want to be clear about that first." I had gone very still. "Ethan." "I'm aware of the timing," he said. "I'm aware it's been less than a week, and the circumstances are extraordinary, and I'm not asking for anything. I'm asking a question, which is different." "Ask it," I said again. Quieter. "The bond," he said, "between an alpha and a Luna, in the traditional sense, before it became conflated with mate bonds specifically. The founding record describes it as a distinct thing, a working partnership, a deliberate choice rather than a fated one." He paused. "I don't believe in forcing fate. I don't believe in assuming, but I would be dishonest if I didn't tell you that the last week has shown me something I wasn't expecting." The compound was visible ahead, warm-lit windows in the dark. "Which is," I said, "that the person I've needed beside me, not just in this crisis, but in general, in the actual work of leading this pack, has apparently been here for 24 years, and I was too poorly calibrated to see it." I thought about 6 years ago, the southern border, the fact he'd filed away and not followed up on, the 6 years between then and now. "You're seeing it now," I said. "Yes, direct, certain, no performance of modesty about it." I walked in silence for a moment, the territory steady around me, the pack breathing its night-quiet breath, Dorothy's stone warm in my pocket. "Ask me again in a month," I said finally. He looked at me. "Not because I need to think about it," I said carefully, Because we both need to stand in what this week has been, and let it settle, and make sure what we're seeing is the real thing, and not just the intensity of an extraordinary week making everything feel more significant than it is. I paused. My father had a rule: never make permanent decisions in the immediate aftermath of a crisis. Wait until the ordinary light comes back, then look again. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "That's good advice," he said. He was a good physician. He was. A pause. "A month, then." "A month," I agreed. We reached the compound door. Ethan held it open. A simple, unremarkable gesture, the kind that doesn't announce itself. "Sophia," my name in that register, the one underneath. I looked at him. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think it's the intensity of the week." I held his gaze for a moment. The land warm around me, the pack asleep. The northern boundary stone behind us somewhere in the dark. The first debt settled, and the covenant renewed, and the territory folded around me like something that had always been true. "Neither do I said. "A month, anyway." He almost smiled, the full approximation of it, closer than I'd seen before. "A month," he said. And I walked inside, into the warm light of the compound, into the ordinary evening of a pack that was finally, properly, tended. Chapter 10. 1 month later, the portrait came down. Not because anyone ordered it, not Ethan, not the council, not me. It came down because Reese from the Northern Quarter came to me on a Tuesday afternoon with a proposal written in careful, slightly nervous handwriting on 2 sheets of paper, requesting permission to replace it. Not with nothing, with something else. She wanted to commission a new piece for the Eastern Corridor, a mural, full wall, floor to ceiling, depicting the pack's actual history. Not the curated version, not the official narrative that had smoothed its edges for 15 years. The real one, the settlement, the founding families, the first debt, and the original Luna. The women who had kept the knowledge alive, Dorothy's grandmother, her grandmother's grandmother, all of them, named, painted into the wall where the pack walked every day. And at the northern boundary stone, in the center of the composition, a figure with her thumb pressed to granite in the dark, 300 wolves behind her in the starlight. Reese had put a note at the bottom of the proposal, in smaller handwriting. "I know someone who's good at walls." I read it twice, then I laughed, the first real, uncomplicated laugh I'd had in longer than I could pinpoint, and wrote "yes" at the bottom, and handed it back. "Who did you have in mind?" I asked, though I already knew. Reese smiled. "You," she said. "Obviously." So that's how I ended up on a scaffold in the Eastern Corridor on a Wednesday morning, 33 days after the new moon, with a brush in my hand and the outline of Greymoor's true history sketched in charcoal on the wall in front of me. I was a muralist before any of this. It's easy to forget that, in the accumulation of everything that had happened, the debt, the boundary stone, the tethering, the council meetings and the archive updates, and the formal investiture ceremony that had happened 2 weeks ago with the whole pack present, and Richard saying the words with his gruff, recalibrated sincerity, and Dorothy watching from the front row with her grandmother's stone in her pocket. Easy to forget that, before I was any of those things, I was the woman who painted walls. I hadn't painted anything since the Great Hall flood, since the mop and the portrait, and Logan appearing behind me and saying "You've been staring at it for 4 minutes." My hands remembered, though. They always do. My father's hands had remembered medicine even in his sleep. I'd watched him, sometimes, the particular way his fingers moved when he was dreaming, precise and purposeful, going through procedures his waking mind had long since made automatic. I had his hands. The memory was in them. I painted. Dorothy came at 10 with tea, and sat on a chair below the scaffold, and read to me from her document, the one we'd been working on together since the morning after the new moon, her voice and her memory, and my questions, pulling 30 years of kept knowledge into written form. She was 60 pages in. She wrote with the particular precision of someone who has been saving their words for a long time and knows exactly what each one is worth. She read me the section she'd finished the previous evening, her account of the night she'd gone to Ethan's father, the conversation in the Great Hall, the way he'd thanked her, the walk home afterward, alone, with the knowledge still in her hands and nowhere to put it. I kept painting while she read, the charcoal outline of the founding settlement, the original families, the tree line as it had looked a century ago. "How did you keep going?" I asked, when she paused, after he dismissed it. 30 years of keeping something alive that no one in power would receive. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "I kept going," she said, "because the alternative was letting it die. And if it died, the pack died with it eventually. Maybe not in my lifetime, but eventually. And I am not built for letting things die when I can prevent it." She paused. "Your father was the same way. It's why he stayed in this pack when he could have had a more prestigious position elsewhere. He was not built for walking away from something that needed him." I thought about that. Brush on wall, steady and certain. "He never told me that," I said, "that he'd had other options." "He wouldn't have," Dorothy said. "It wasn't relevant to him. The decision was made. He didn't need you to know the alternatives he'd declined." She paused. "Some people are like that. They choose, and then they simply inhabit the choice, without drama, without requiring anyone to acknowledge the cost." I kept painting. "Is that what I did?" I said quietly. 24 years of inhabiting a choice I didn't consciously make? "You chose every morning," Dorothy said simply. "Every morning you woke up in this pack and decided to tend it. That's not an unconscious drift. That's a choice made so consistently it became invisible." She paused. "The best choices usually do." Logan came at noon with food. He'd apparently adopted this as a permanent role, the bringing of food at intervals to people doing important things, which suited him precisely because it was useful without requiring him to be solemn about it. He looked at the wall for a long time. "That's Dorothy," he said, pointing at a figure I'd sketched in charcoal near the center. Small, straight-backed, holding a book in both hands with the fierce, careful grip of someone whose life's work is inside it. "It is," I said. "She's going to pretend to object and then love it," he said. "I know." He handed up a plate and looked at the rest of the composition. His eyes moved slowly across the charcoal outlines. The settlement, the founding families, the generations of women passing the knowledge forward, the boundary stone at the northern edge. "Where are you?" he asked. I pointed to the center-right section. The figure at the boundary stone, thumb on granite, 300 wolves behind her in the dark. Logan looked at it for a moment. Something moved through his expression. Brief, genuine, the same unguarded quality he'd shown in the corridor that first morning, when the world had still been the shape it had always been, and neither of us had known yet what was coming. "It's good," he said, simply, "really good." "It's barely started." "I know. It's still good." He handed up another piece of bread. "Ethan's going to find a reason to walk past this corridor approximately 6 times a day while you're working on it." "He already has," I said, "twice this morning." Logan grinned. "The real one, not the performed ease, the one that reached his eyes." "Good," he said. "He needs something to do with the feeling that isn't making strategic decisions." I looked down at him from the scaffold. "Logan." "Yes?" "Thank you. For all of it. The soup, the notes, the bread at regular intervals. All of it." He looked up at me with that careful attention that lived underneath the ease. "That's what family does," he said simply. I turned back to the wall before he could see my face. Ethan came at 3. Not with food, not with documents, not with pack business. He came and stood at the foot of the scaffold with his hands in his pockets, and looked at the wall the way he looked at everything, fully, simultaneously processing surface and underneath. "Dorothy told me about the commission," he said. "Reese's idea," I said. "I'm just executing." "You're doing considerably more than executing." He tilted his head slightly, reading the composition. "Is that the original settlement clearing?" "Yes. The founding families are here." I indicated the left section. "And the generational transmission is along this middle band, following the tree line east. Then the boundary stone here, and I'm planning to bring it back west along the top, with the pack as it is now. Present day." Present day meaning 300 wolves in the dark, starlight. I paused. "It's going to take a while. Murals always do." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the composition. "The month is almost up," he said. I kept my brush moving. The charcoal line of the tree line, careful and steady. "I know. You said to ask again when the ordinary light came back." I looked down at him. The ordinary light was coming through the corridor windows at its Wednesday afternoon angle, flat and even, and completely unremarkable. Ethan Voss, standing at the foot of a scaffold with his hands in his pockets, looking up at me with that full attention that I had spent 33 days getting used to and still hadn't quite managed. "It's back," I said. "Yes," he said. "It is." I set my brush across the top of the paint pot, came down the scaffold steps carefully, paint on my hands, the ordinary working smell of pigment and plaster around me. I stood in front of him at the foot of the scaffold. The territory was warm and steady in my awareness, the pack going about its Wednesday, Dorothy's voice from an hour ago still present in my head, the best choices usually do, and my father's watch on my wrist, and the stone in my pocket, and the mural half-sketched on the wall above us. "What's the question?" I said. He looked at me, that fractional easing around the eyes. "I think you know the question." "Say it anyway," I said. "Precisely. You always mean exactly what you say. I want to hear exactly what you mean." A pause. The particular pause of someone who is choosing every word and knows it. "Will you be my Luna?" he said. "Not the Pax. They've already claimed you, and the land has already settled that. Mine. Deliberately. By choice." He held my gaze. "The founding record describes it as a working partnership. A deliberate bond, chosen rather than fated. I'm asking you to choose it, with me." The corridor was very quiet. I thought about 24 years of being adjacent, about the portrait on the wall that no longer hung there, about the mural going up in its place, the real history, named and painted and permanent. I thought about the creek, the exhale, the land knowing my name before I knew it was known. I thought about 2 notes on a kitchen table that had assumed, as ordinary fact, that my mourning mattered. I thought about my father's rule. Wait until the ordinary light comes back, then look again. I was looking. "Yes," I said. Simply, precisely, meaning exactly what I said. Something shifted in his face. The full thing this time, not the approximation. An actual smile, arriving slowly, like something that hadn't had much practice but was attempting it in good faith. It reorganized his face completely, and I stored it carefully, the way you store something you've been waiting a long time to see and want to be sure you remember accurately. "The formal bond process," he said, after a moment, returning to his natural register but warmer now, something underneath it no longer quite so contained. "There are traditional protocols." "Ethan." "Yes?" "Later," I said. "The protocols can wait 20 minutes." He looked at me. "I've been on a scaffold since 8 this morning," I said. "I have paint on both hands. There is a perfectly good bench at the end of this corridor, and I would like to sit down with you for 20 minutes and not discuss protocols." The smile again. More practice this time. Getting easier. "All right," he said. We walked to the bench at the end of the eastern corridor, and sat, and the ordinary Wednesday light came through the windows, and the pack went about its life around us, and the territory was warm and steady, and permanently, irrevocably mine. And for 20 minutes, we didn't discuss anything in particular. It was, I thought, the best 20 minutes I'd had in 24 years. That evening, I went back to the scaffold alone. The compound was settling into its nighttime rhythm, quieter, slower, the particular quality of a pack at peace going about the ordinary business of existing. No shimmer at the northern tree line, no ancient pressure testing the wall, just the land, and the trees, and the 300 people who were mine to tend, going to sleep. I stood at the base of the wall and looked at the charcoal composition in the evening light. The founding settlement, the women with their kept knowledge, the boundary stone in the dark, 300 wolves in the starlight. At the very far right of the composition, the section I'd marked out for present day, I had sketched a single addition that hadn't been in the original proposal, something I'd decided while Dorothy was reading to me this morning, and the brush was moving, and the thought arrived complete, the way the right thoughts sometimes do. A figure in a corridor, standing in front of a wall, looking at something, small, adjacent, at the edge of the composition, watching. Not the center, not the focal point, but there, witnessed, named. The girl who had stood in this corridor at age 9 with her father's hand on her shoulder, looking at a portrait that didn't look like the woman she knew at home, and had said the true thing without knowing yet what truth cost. I picked up my charcoal pencil and added one detail I'd left out: her father's watch on her wrist. Then I stepped back and looked at the whole composition, past and present, and all the true things that had been kept alive in the spaces between the official story, and felt the land breathe around me, steady and permanent and known. "Here," it said, "still here, still yours." "I know," I told it. I covered the paint pots, cleaned the brushes, came down from the scaffold, walked through the compound, past the kitchen where Logan had left the light on, out of what I was increasingly certain was habitual care rather than forgetfulness, past Dorothy's borrowed room, where the lamp was still burning, and 60 pages of 30 years of kept knowledge were stacked beside it, out through the eastern door into the night. The memorial grove was dark and still. I sat for a while beside my father's grave. Not sad, not exactly. Something quieter and more complex than sadness. The specific feeling of a person who has traveled a long distance and arrived somewhere they couldn't have named at the start of the journey, and is sitting with the recognition that the distance was the point. "I'm all right, Dad," I said. "Better than all right." I paused. "You'd like it here, the way it is now." Another pause. "You always did." The grove was quiet, the land present and warm. Then I stood up, brushed grass from my jacket, and walked back toward the compound lights. 3 weeks later, the mural was done. I won't describe it in full. Art resists description, and the pack saw it, and that's what matters. What I'll say is this: on the morning I finished the final section and came down from the scaffold for the last time, I called no announcement and sent no message. I just left the corridor and went to the kitchen and made tea. Within an hour, somehow, the whole compound knew. They came in ones and twos and then in groups. All day, a steady stream of wolves walking the eastern corridor, standing in front of the wall, looking at the real history of the place they called home. I heard them from the kitchen and the study and the places I moved through my ordinary day. I heard, at one point, Richard standing in the corridor for a very long time saying nothing at all. I heard Reese, who had started it all with her careful handwriting and her 2 sheets of paper, telling someone beside her the names of the women in the middle band, Dorothy's grandmother, her grandmother's grandmother, reading them off like a list she'd memorized. Which she had. She'd asked Dorothy to teach her. I heard, late in the afternoon, Logan saying to someone in a voice that was trying to be casual and not quite managing it, "That one in the corner, with the watch, that's her, when she was 9. And I heard the person beside him say, "She's been here the whole time." "Yes," Logan said, "she has." That night, Ethan and I walked the inner boundary. The same route as a month ago. Memorial Grove, settlement clearing, Dorothy's cottage, back. The same quiet, companionable pace. The same dark, the same stars. The same land warm and present around me, with its settled, permanent frequency. But different, too. Different because the walk itself was different. Easier, the way familiar things become easier with repetition. Different because the territory felt like home, in a way that was new even against the 24 years of knowing it. The tethering, settling further into permanence with every week that passed. Different because of the warm presence beside me that was learning, slowly and deliberately and in good faith, to be less contained. To let what he meant show in the register underneath the evenness. To walk 20 minutes in a corridor without discussing protocols. "The council approved the renewal schedule," he said at one point. "It'll be in the formal charter. Every generation, documented and assigned and non-negotiable." "Good," I said. "No more convenient forgetting." "No more convenient forgetting," he agreed. We passed Dorothy's cottage, light in the window. She was always the last one to turn off her lamp. "She's on page 92, I said. "I know. She reads me sections." A pause. "She's a remarkable writer." "She's a remarkable person, who happens to also be a remarkable writer." The settlement clearing opened up ahead, flat and grassy, the quality of stillness I'd loved since childhood, the age of the surrounding trees making the space feel like the center of something. We stopped there, the way we sometimes did on these walks. No agenda, just the clearing and the stars and the particular piece of things being as they should be. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, "about what you said, about the portrait staying up as a record." "You're going to disagree." "No, He looked at the stars. I think you're right. I think comfortable history is dangerous history. And the portrait is an accurate document of what comfortable history looks like. A pause. I added a plaque. I looked at him. What does it say? Luna Evelyn Voss, 15 years. The pack's history includes her, and what we learned from it. I stood with that for a moment. The specific precision of it. No condemnation, no erasure, no comfortable revision. Just truth, plainly stated, permanent. That's right, I said. I thought you'd think so. We stood in the clearing for a while, the stars doing what they always did over Greymoor. Unhurried, constant, present. The formal bond ceremony, Ethan said. The council is asking about timing. Tell them spring, I said, when the pack can be outside. I want it at the settlement clearing, not the Great Hall. I paused, and I want Dorothy to say the words. He looked at me. Not a council member, I said. Not a formal officiant with a title. Dorothy. She's kept the real meaning of this alive for 30 years. She should be the one to say it out loud in front of everyone. Finally, with everyone listening. A long quiet. She'll cry, he said. She'll try not to, I said. She'll almost succeed. And then she'll be furious at herself, and it'll be the most Dorothy thing that has ever happened, and the pack will love her for it. Ethan made a sound that was, unmistakably, a quiet laugh. Brief, genuine, unguarded. The kind that arrives without permission and leaves before you've fully registered it. I registered it. I was paying attention. Spring, he said. Spring, I agreed. We walked back through the dark together. The territory warm around us, the pack asleep, the mural drying in the eastern corridor, with all of Greymoor's true history painted into it, permanent, and witnessed, and finally named. At the compound door, Ethan held it open. Sophia. My name in that register. I knew it well now, what it sounded like when something made it through the evenness, when the underneath showed. I looked at him. I'm glad it was you, he said. That the land recognized, that Evelyn left the letter for, that came to my study at 5:40 in the morning, with the truth in both hands. A pause. I'm glad it was you. I held that for a moment, the simple weight of it. Being glad of, specifically, not grateful for what I'd done, not relieved by the outcome. Glad of the person, glad of me. I know, I said, softly, so am I. And walked inside, into the warm light. Somewhere, 400 miles away, in a motel room that she'd since left for somewhere quieter, Evelyn was probably making her own kind of peace with the shape of things. I didn't know where she was. I didn't know if she'd heard, through whatever channels exiled people use, what had happened at the northern boundary stone. I didn't know if she'd understood, when she slipped that envelope under my door and walked away, that it was the truest thing she'd ever done for this pack. I hoped she had. I hoped, wherever she was, that she was building something real, something she'd actually chosen, something that didn't require performance to sustain it. I hoped she was sleeping through the night. In the eastern corridor, the mural dried. The founding families in their settlement, the women with their kept knowledge, named and painted and permanent. Dorothy, straight-backed, holding her book. The boundary stone in the dark, the figure with her thumb on granite. 300 wolves in the starlight. And in the corner, small, adjacent, a girl at the edge of the frame with her father's watch on her wrist. Watching. Not the center, not yet. But there. Witnessed. Present. Tended by the land that had known her name for 24 years before anyone thought to say it out loud. The land that was hers now, permanently, irrevocably. The pack that had been hers all along, and a mural on the wall that said so. For everyone who came after, walking that corridor, living in that history, inheriting that truth, for all of them, she was here. She was always here. The pack trusted the wrong Luna for generations. Until the night she bled for them anyway. And after that, they never got it wrong again.